up, Ethan? Long time no see. I had had some free time today, and it's like way too hot. I was gonna take my dog for a little hike, and then I was like, it's just like 95 degrees, and I was like, it's probably better for me to just chill. So I was like, I'll play some game. This is a new game I'm playing, so far so good. What's up, Mr. Chang? How has your life been since the last couple months since I haven't been on? It's over 100. Yeah, nice. I mean, Texas definitely has its fair share of hot weather. But it definitely feels like summer now. I feel like there's always like a couple months, like I would say between like April and May, and maybe into June. Well, no, like April and May, where it's like the weather, like you get like a hot day every once in a while, and it's just like a sign of like, okay, summer's about to start, and then June hits, and then the real weather comes out. You're doing summer semester? What are you what are you doing in summer semester?
If I stop chatting, it means I've fallen asleep. LMFAO.
I wouldn't be surprised if you fell asleep, Ethan, knowing what I know about you. That sounds like pretty standard. Thanks for the sub. Yeah, I had I lost so that Minecraft server that we had, I had to stop the subscription because we weren't using it. So I downloaded the folder in case I ever wanted to go back to it, but as of right now, that's sort of, it's just sitting on my hard drive. What is the Warden, by the way? When you talk about Minecraft.
My friends make fun of me for falling asleep on calls.
My inventory's full? Ooh. Okay. Experimental psych, adulthood and development, community corrections. Okay. Experimental psychology. Okay, that sounds like a pretty kind of standard run-of-the-mill kind of class setup. I think experimental psych sounds interesting. What's up, Adarsh? How's your summer? Oh, the Warden. Okay, that's like a new thing. Okay. Still getting the hang of this game. I keep forgetting that I need to feed these. I need to get like this blood. I have to feed to get my health up. Leaving for India on Sunday. Nice. Okay. This game is kind of like I actually can't really explain it quite yet. I just started playing it today. So it's kind of like you're basically like a vampire essentially, and you're trying to like rebuild. You've like reawoken, I think, is the premise, and you're trying to rebuild. You're building a castle, so there's a little bit of like resource collection and like crafting involved in it. where you have to like get materials to build a castle and like all this stuff. And there's also like combat. You can like hunt things. I think there's a PvP element to it as well. So yeah, it's kind of got a lot of different elements. It's supposed to be pretty good, and it seems like a game that has some of the stuff that I like in games. So I figured I'd give it a shot. I have a little bit of time in the next week or two before I go on a trip to Colombia. So just giving it a shot, but I'm still getting the hang of it. Seems like my inventory is getting full, so I have to go back. Yeah, I haven't so Minecraft is a game that I have not gone back to since we did our whole server thing a couple years ago. I think I played it so much back then that I kind of tapped myself out. Is this my castle? Hold on, how do I... Oh no, I'm down there. But Adarsh, I know you wanted to watch some of the Crash Course Philosophy stuff. Are you still interested in doing that? Should go this way. Oh, wait, I can't go this way because I can't. I should build a second door to get in here. Yeah? Okay. So let me see. It was the Crash Course, right? What do I want in here? Maybe just put rocks. And this kind of stuff. Ruby, amethyst, these gems, copper, paper, I want to keep that in here, bricks. So Crash Course, Psychology. Let's see what we find. Is it the playlist? Let's see. The one that starts with like intro to psychology, and then it goes after that it goes psychological research, chemical mind, meet your master, sensation and perception, homunculus, etc. Is that the playlist you're talking about? So the first video is this one, right? Intro, 10-minute video, intro to psych. How many videos are on the playlist? Oh, philosophy. Sorry, philosophy. You're right. Oh no, I'm gonna burn alive. Hold on. So part of this game is the fact that you're a vampire, so when the sun comes out during the day, you have to be in a shadow somewhere. Which is really annoying because... Oh, that thing's not working. Do I have bones? I have 50 bones. So this thing is supposed to generate mist to protect me, but I didn't have bones in there. There we go. Okay. Now I should be fine. Crash Course Philosophy. Okay, hold on. Oh, you did? Okay. Alright, go take a nap, Ethan. How do I... how's the past few months been for me? Pretty good. Pretty good. Yeah, I've got, I have had a couple of pretty big life changes, I would say, over the last 3 to 4 months. I have gotten married, and I have actually a baby on the way. So, some life changes for me. All right. When you say understaffed, are you referring to your? Do you have the same job that you've had for a while, Mr. Chang, or have you switched it up? Yeah, I got a lot of new things on the way. Things kind of happen pretty quick. They all just kind of all happen around the same time. So, just kind of, sometimes life is less about planning, more about just going with the flow. Yeah, you probably wouldn't have known at that point, Adarsh. You saw me? Oh yeah, I would. Yeah, you would. I wouldn't. It just didn't come up. I didn't bring it up. But yeah. Okay, can I make my copper sword? That's a 9, gear level 9. Let me just make this real quick. Oh, that's right. Yeah, Bass Pro Shop loss prevention. I remember us talking about that last time. But yeah, so I probably won't be able to stream very much in the future. Obviously, I'm gonna have a whole set of responsibilities. How do you like working at Bass Pro Shop? I know you've been there for a little while now, so I'd be curious if you are digging it. All right, Ethan, take it easy. Wait, you watch The Employees? Copper sword. How do I salvage this thing? All right, Adarsh, let's watch the first one here and see what we got. Do you want to... we should probably chat a little bit, huh? While we watch it. Let me, if you want to chat, feel free to... You can, call me on Discord if you want. And then I'll just tell you... We can, start it at the same time. Yeah, just a voice call. Easy. Hello?
Hello.
What's up?
I think it's working, right? You can hear me?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Loud and
Cool.
clear.
All right. I don't know if you still have that extension thing.
Oh, the one that it was used to be able to play
That we used
videos
last time to
synchronously?
watch, yeah. Called MetaStream, I think. Let's go.
Was that a extension for Chrome?
Yeah, Chrome extension. MetaStream, I think it's called. Yeah, this thing.
Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
Ungoogled extensions. Ooh, I hope this works.
Wait, Mr. Chang, you said that your job is mostly to catch employees? I thought when I think loss prevention, I would have thought you were talking about customers or people coming in and stealing stuff.
Settings.
But I guess employees can get up to some no good business as well.
Okay, wait, download. Okay, I have done a lot of changes to my computer. Okay, I think it should work now. So if I go to Meta stream. Or, if I just paste this philosophy link, I should be able to just send you a link and you can click to join.
Okay.
Hopefully that'll work.
So then I'll be watching it through MetaStream, right? Not through YouTube.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. All right. Invite. Copy.
We watch everybody.
All right. Yeah.
You're like the big brother of the store. Did you figure out what you're doing this summer, Adarsh?
Yeah, I'm at an internship at Stanford right now. Well, unofficially, because they
Right,
don't.
okay.
Their school isn't over, so I wasn't allowed to start officially until like, I think in 5 days. But I'm leaving for 2 weeks, so I guess that'll fully start in like July. But right now I'm just doing like home research stuff that I
Okay,
can do on
yeah,
the internet.
I think
Yeah.
last time we talked, you said the same. I was just curious if you'd started yet.
Yeah. Probably should be working on that a little more in the last few weeks, but I'm packing, so.
So you're going to be in
Alright, I
India for
guess.
how long?
2 weeks, probably. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, there's a wedding, so I'm gonna meet like 1,000 people that are apparently related to me,
1,000?
and yeah, it's a
Holy-
meme. Indian weddings are just like huge.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, they're stereotypically huge. But
Alright.
I haven't been to one in a while, so this might be fun. All right, I think it's loaded. Do you see the video?
Yeah, give me 1 second. Can I open in pop-up? To enable
Yeah,
playback.
there should be like a
Open
the
pop-up. Okay.
3 dots
Pop-up was
in like
blocked.
the meta stream.
Okay, give me a second. There we go.
Oh, yeah, you're talking about the Firefox thing, right? Or like the the video pop out thing. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, just so that I put it on the stream.
Yeah, makes
I'm
sense.
just trying to figure out a way to get the and then if I can use guess I can just do that. Actually, give me a
There's
second.
an inbuilt like pop out thing if you want to use that instead of the extension thing. Yeah.
Give
Okay.
me 1
going to-
second.
Toggle your DJ so you can play and pause as well.
What's philosophy? Okay, just need to crop
Crash
this.
course philosophy.
Oops.
Yep. That worked.
Okay, put that there, and then okay. Cool. I think we should be good to go now.
Philosophy is brought.
Just make sure volume seems legit. Okay. Ready?
Yep.
Okay. So this is going to be basic, right? Probably.
Yeah.
Okay.
Brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace. Share your passion with the world.
I'm Hank Green, and you and I are about to embark on a journey of inquiry into the whole world, your world, in an effort to figure out what gives it meaning, what makes it beautiful, where its evils come from, and ultimately what is the very nature of reality itself. And along the way, we're going to question every aspect of your own personal life. Why do you do what you do? Why do you think what you think? Why do you feel what you feel? Now, if you've joined me on Crash Course before, you might say we've already learned all that stuff, like in psychology and biology and anatomy and physiology. ideology. And it's true, science can definitely help us understand our thoughts and feelings and actions. But on this particular journey, we're going to be exploring aspects of the human condition that can't be explained only by hormones or neurotransmitters, by personal experiences or hereditary conditions. Because all of those chemicals and experiences that make us who we are can actually raise as many questions as they answer. Like, if all of my decisions really are just the result of how I was raised and what chemicals I have flowing through my brain, then are any of my choices actually free? And if I'm not truly free to make my own decisions or choose my own actions, then how can I be held accountable for them? Yeah, it's gonna be that kind of journey. Rather than just looking at the world and describing what
I like
we
how,
see,
like, in the beginning-
we'll be evaluating it. We will
Like
Yes,
the,
the
they
question that we
they
are-
already preview like where we're gonna end up.
Exactly.
We'll take nothing as given, set our assumptions aside, or at least try really hard to, and do our best to see the world as if we've never seen it before. And for what it's worth, we'll also be talking about Batman and what Dick Grayson can teach us about the concept of identity. And we'll learn how The Matrix can help us understand the life and writing of Rene Descartes. Also, we'll try to answer unanswerable questions and puzzle over paradoxes that have plagued geniuses for thousands of years. It's gonna be hard and enlightening and frustrating, and if I do my job properly, it'll stick with you long after you and I have parted ways. Because we are going to do philosophy. These days, people use the word philosophy to describe some opinion they might have or an approach they have to a certain topic. Like, you might have a philosophy when it comes to golf, though I personally do not. But we are going to use this word more narrowly to describe a way of approaching the world that traces its roots back to ancient Greece, 500 years before the Common Era. This was a time of great intellectual movement around the world. Buddhism and Jainism were developing in Asia at the same time philosophical thought was emerging in Greece. There, scholars were tangled up in a distinction they were just beginning to make between philos and mythos, or what we'd now roughly call science and storytelling. At that time, there were bards like Homer who were trying to understand and explain the world through stories, while the earliest philosophers were using methods that were more analytical and scientific, although they didn't really have the concept of science back then. So philosophia, literally the love of wisdom, was a new way of trying to make sense of the world. When the earliest philosophers used the word philosophy, they basically meant the academic study of anything, which, like, I guess could include golf. But at what we might call the first universities in the Western world, Plato's Academy and its rival Aristotle's Lyceum, math, biology, physics, poetry, political science, and astronomy were all considered to be philosophy. Eventually, scholars began thinking of these fields differently, as separate disciplines. Studies that had strong empirical elements came to be considered science, a search for answers. But philosophy came to be understood more as a way of thinking about questions. Big questions. And today, 2,500 years after the ancient Greeks first brought them up, philosophers still love asking questions, oftentimes the same questions, and they don't mind that they never get an answer. So, what are these big questions that have managed to intrigue and stump philosophers for so long? One of the first might best be phrased as, what is the world like? Sounds simple enough to answer, right? Like, just look around and see all the stuff. Well, this is what the world is like. But the philosophical approach isn't just based on observation. It has other, much more complex questions packed inside it. When a philosopher wonders what the world is like, she might really be asking, what's the nature of reality? Like, is the world just made up of matter and energy, or is there something else going on? And if it is just matter and energy, then where did it all come from? Is there a god? And if so, then what is he or she or it like? And for that matter, when you're asking about the world, can you also be asking about the nature of yourself as a citizen of the world? So, what kind of being am I? Do I have a soul? Is there something immaterial about me that will survive after I die? All of these questions are ways of exploring what philosophers call metaphysics, one of the three main branches of philosophy, an effort to understand the fundamental nature of the world, the universe, and of being. Now, if those questions aren't heady enough for you, we, as students of philosophy, also have a whole separate set of questions that are about how we know the answers to any of this stuff. This particular strain of philosophy, which is like knowing about knowing, is epistemology, literally the study of knowledge, the second major field of philosophy. And it poses questions like, is the world really what I think it is? Like, really, is everything I see and think and experience, is it actually true? If it isn't, then what is true? And what's the best way to go about figuring out the truth? Is science the best way, or are there more ethereal paths to truth? Paths that science can never really travel. And let's say that after a lot of searching and question asking, I begin to develop some ideas, like an inkling about what might be true. Then, how do I know if I'm right? How will I ever know I'm wrong? Can I ever be certain about anything? Now, at this point, I wouldn't blame you if you're thinking, am I real? Do I Do I know anything? Well, as
real
questions go,
quick.
these might not seem super philosophy.
I
Restraint
wanna
of
go
you are
back
strange,
to
you are strange,
that
different kind of
image.
being. So what
Yeah, sure.
world? So the world, so isn't of the world.
Where is it? Here.
That one?
Um,
Yeah.
The branch of philosophy that studies the nature of reality, the branch of philosophy that studies the nature and scope of knowledge, and then ethics, branch of philosophy that I can't read that word. What does it say?
That studies and evaluates human conduct.
Okay. The branch of philosophy that studies the nature of beauty. This is different than what I had thought a diagram. Sometimes I've seen diagrams that sort of like have like these layers of philosophy where like the deeper, like the lower, the most like at the bottom is metaphysics, right? Or no, I thought, wait, the bottom isn't epistemology like the most fundamental?
See, it's really interesting because within each field, you probably get to the other ones in a circular sense. So, like, the act of trying to say what is the bottom of our theory is in itself an epistemological act, right? But simultaneously, supposing there to be a bottom of your knowledge, like, sort of supposes a metaphysical reality. So it's like really hard to say which one comes first, I guess.
Yeah, but I think the way I would think about it is that like you have to have, in order to like actually.
Shadow's about to like get off your Diablo character.
Yeah. I think I feel like there's got to be, like, you have to start off with actually investigating like what is true, like how do you know what you know, like how can you know anything, like because if you don't start there, then everything
Right.
after that
Yeah,
is
I think
kind
that's
of,
probably correct. That you
Isn't that
have to
epistemology?
start there.
Is that not
Yeah,
epistemology?
but you have to inform that with some metaphysical questions, I would say. So, like, how do you classify the ability to know? That might be a metaphysical question itself, as opposed to talking about how much you know, which is an epistemological question. Right. Like, let's say
No.
knowledge, a large theory of knowledge, a lot of theories of knowledge is that the soul is the thing that experiences knowledge. Well, that's a metaphysical question.
The metaphysical question is the
Right.
fact that what is the thing that's actually experiencing it.
Yeah, so what is the thing that's knowing is a metaphysical question, and knowledge, yeah, the scopes of knowledge are epistemological, right? So you get both at the beginning, I guess.
Okay. I'm assuming they'll go into this a little bit more as we go on, because like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
terminology is still something that I'm a little unclear on. Like I understand the concepts,
yeah.
but I never remember like what is it? Is it metaphysics or is it epistemology? Like those terms are.
The way I think about it is that metaphysics, it's like physics. So what is the world? Metaphysics is just like the most what is the world question. Like that's what it's doing. And then epistemology is just I just know that's knowledge. I think I just have that linked in my head that it's like how much do I know? How can I know what I know? Like those sort of
Wait, is
questions.
epistemology how do I know what I know or how much do I know? Because I feel like those are very different questions.
They're both, like, in a sense, like, you know, English is very imprecise, but how do I know like, how is it that I came to this conclusion? Based off what evidence, on what motivations, on what facts, what logical steps did I take? That is often an epistemological thing. Also, what do I know, given the facts, sort of logical deduction. I think they go into some logic.
Okay, maybe we just keep going. I was just trying to
Yeah.
make sure I got these terms correct.
Yeah.
Can I ever be wrong? Can I ever wrong? Can I know I'm wrong? Ever know I'm wrong? I ever know I'm
It's a-
wrong? Can I ever be certain about anything? Now, at this point, I wouldn't blame you if you're thinking, Am I real? Do I know anything? Well, as questions go, these might not seem super practical, but there's another area of philosophy that helps frame your thinking around what you actually do, like how you should act and what you should attach meaning to. It's called value theory, and it's usually divided into two main branches. The first is ethics. You've heard of it. It's the thing that politicians are always said to lack and Jedi are supposed to have in great supply. Though, don't get me started on the prequels. In philosophy, though, ethics isn't just a code of what's right and what's wrong. It's the study of how humans should live with each other. Rather than just sitting around and judging people, ethics involves posing questions like, how should I live? Is there any reason that I should treat, say, strangers differently than the people I love? And for that matter, do I owe anything to myself? What about animals or the earth? And if I do have any of these obligations at all, where do they come from? Who says? Ultimately, whatever system you use to decide what's good or evil as human behavior goes is determined by your values. That's why ethics is considered part of value theory. But the other part of value theory isn't about what's right. It's about what's beautiful. Aesthetics is the study of beauty and art. Now, the concept of beauty is talked about practically everywhere, from the media to art school to barber college. But for philosophers, the pursuit of aesthetics involves considering what beauty is and whether it even exists. Aesthetics is a part of value theory because beauty and art are things we value and evaluate. And many people who study this particular kind of philosophy, known as aestheticians, believe there is such a thing as the beautiful. Something that doesn't just depend on what you happen to find attractive, but something that's just objectively true. And finally, there's one more aspect of philosophy that I should mention because it doesn't ask questions so much as help us find answers. Yes, finally, some answers. And that thing, which I happen to think can be beautiful in its own way, is logic. Logic is the philosopher's toolbox. It contains the saws and hammers, the microscopes and beakers that philosophers use to go about answering their questions in a clear, systematic way. Logic is about reasoning, giving strong arguments that don't fall victim to fallacies, which are, as you will learn, the mortal enemies of philosophical precision. Okay, so metaphysics, epistemology, value theory, they might all seem pretty airy and abstract, but don't worry because you have already done philosophy, even though you might not realize it. You do it in almost every aspect of your life. Every time you argue with your parents or wonder if you should date someone or decide to eat a salad instead of a ham and cheese hot pocket, you are doing philosophy. Because you're thinking about the world and your place in it. You're figuring out what you value, why you value it, and what you should do about it. So here's our plan. We're gonna learn about the major fields of philosophy, posing questions and considering possible answers along the way, and each time we will use a two-step method. First, we'll really try to understand. You're not gonna agree with all the ideas that I present to you, and I won't agree with them either. That's not the point. The point in step one is to really try to get inside of an idea, to understand it as charitably as possible. Then, in step two, you'll subject your understanding to some serious critical evaluation. Basically, you'll try to knock down what you think you know about a particular view of the world. And you'll do this whether you agree with the view or not. Why? Because only when you challenge your understanding of how some people view the world can you decide for yourself if theirs is a view worth having. Which leads me to my final point. Philosophy is not your usual field of study. I'm not going to be teaching you a body of knowledge where success means you know a bunch of stuff. Success in this course will mean that you know how to think. All we have are questions, and all you have is a brain. And the goal of philosophy is for you to use your brain to come up with the answers that make the most sense to you. You'll learn how to formulate arguments to support your ideas so you can explain why you think you're right, which, if you've ever been on the internet, you know is something that not a lot of people are good at. In order to do that, you're gonna need to understand philosophical reasoning, the tools we use to investigate life's most perplexing questions. And that is where we're gonna be headed the next time we meet. For now, you've learned about the historical origins of philosophy in ancient Greece and its three main divisions: metaphysics, epistemology, and value theory. We also talked about logic and how you're going to use it to understand and critically evaluate a whole host of different worldviews. Not about golf. This episode of Crash Course Philosophy is made possible by
Right,
Squarespace.
so that's the end of the
Squarespace is
first
a way to
episode.
create a website,
I'll
blog, or
just
online.
manually change them, I think. That'll be
So
the
ha-
easiest way to...
Yeah, just put in the next one.
Yeah.
Akash, what's up? Got any summer plans, Akash?
there.
You shouldn't be here, and soon you won't be.
This is a boss. I don't know if I can. Nope.
Next, add media. Paste any link. Add session. Okay.
Crash Course Philosophy is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace.
So what's the title of this one?
Aristotle
How
once
to argue.
described humans as the rational animal. Well, actually, he said that man is the rational animal, but we don't have to be sexist just because he was. And if you've ever gotten into an argument with someone about religion or politics or which Hemsworth is the hottest, then you've experienced how irrational people can be about their opinions. But what Aristotle meant is that rationality is our distinguishing characteristic. It's what sets us apart from the beast.
How to argue? Okay, rationality. Okay, so this is gonna get us into like a little bit of like logic stuff, probably.
Yeah, logical tools and stuff.
Okay. Akash, you're trying to attempt to understand general relativity.
Ooh.
Good luck. All the best. I think general relativity is actually general relativity is something that might be up your alley more, Darsh. It's the physics stuff.
Yeah.
What's
Yes,
your
indeed.
advice for Akash with general relativity?
Don't watch documentaries. It's all fake news. Listen to some sort of scientist or physicist, but not through a documentary. Like through some random lecture recorded on 720p. That's the most accurate information you're gonna get.
You mean like don't watch a like overly produced documentary?
Yeah, like pop science is not very accurate when it comes to like modern physics. It's kind of unfortunate, but like especially quantum physics actually. But general relativity is okay, but they sort of overplay that sort of like what is like the fabric, and then there's like a bowling ball in it, and then it's like, oh look, the fabric's bending. They sort of just say that over and over again.
That's not that
That's not
accurate.
It's not the worst thing in the world, but like there's a little more nuance in there. It's hard to like use English. Like I don't know. Sometimes it's just like I only know the math, and it's like, what does this mean? It's like, oh, that's a good question.
Do you feel like when you start to get into like really abstract like concepts that are mathematical, it's like you if someone else is trying to understand it, do you feel like you have a very different intuition about it because you understand the math behind it? Like it's almost like you're seeing it differently.
Yeah, most definitely. Like I feel like I can actually see like 4 dimensions in like not a literal way, but like I can intuitively, like if there's a system and it has 4 parameters, I can like in a semi-spatial sense because I just work with that math all the time, right? And that's just a level of intuition that like it just comes through exposure, right, through the math. Another thing is that most physical objects, like what should I say, phenomena. Like there are very few physical phenomena we understand, like like descriptively and not mathematically. But there are most physical phenomena fundamentally we only understand mathematically and not descriptively.
Yeah, and I think that like if you don't know the math, like for me for example, I don't know like the math behind any of the that kind of physics stuff. So it all is more, it feels like I'm getting a dumbed down version of it that's just sort of like an approximation. And I guess that's, for me, that's probably enough, like, because I'm not, it's not something that I need to know on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, it's definitely.
But
yeah,
makes me kind of feel like I'm missing something. Like it's almost like there's a way of knowing that exists out there that I don't have access to. That would be kind of really cool to have access to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely feel that as well. Like the more math I learn, the more I'm like, wait, this just changes the way I like think. Like, and that's not even like, oh my god, this is going to revolutionize. Like no, I'll learn some math, and then like 3 weeks later, I'll be thinking about something, and then I'll have some thoughts, and then like if some time later, I'll like, wait, that thought was like very much influenced by the new math I learned like a few weeks ago.
That's crazy.
So, yeah, I think it's just working with like, because a lot of math, especially physical math, is like how something relates to another, right? And then it turns out a lot of things will relate to things in your everyday life, right? So, just thinking about different relationships are It's really useful, just in a thought sense, very practical. In terms of general relativity specifically, I would say that it's hard to say. I mean, I assume they've already learned special relativity.
Do you usually learn that first?
Yeah, I learned it in the fall. Special relativity is the easier, simpler version that's not fully complete, and general relativity is the difference between special relativity and general relativity is probably an entire degree of physics. About it.
Wow.
Like to get a good understanding of the principles.
And those were both Einstein, right?
Yeah, both Einstein. Einstein made his theory and was like, wait, this is wrong. And then years later, he made the better one that was much harder to understand. Okay, he says he's trying to do Python. Okay. You might just want to search, like, optical simulations for, like gravitational lensing. And then just, there are some good computer models for that. That'll probably be the easiest thing if you're just looking for tracing paths in Python. But if you're not trying to render anything, you're just doing a calculation, then I'm not sure. But yeah, that's really the best I can say, other than like going to get like a degree in physics. It's very, I mean, just reading the books is fine, but that's like equivalent work to getting the degree, right? It's just like learning it. So I don't know how much your chatter wants to like learn, or just needs to understand some big things to do what they're doing, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I know that Akash is mostly deals with like, he's more on the software side. So my guess is that
Yeah.
probably if you're trying to like simulate something,
Tracing the path of light. Well, as long as okay. This is very hard because basically you just have to find the straight lines in a curved space. But except for like very, very like oversimplified models, like it's very, very, very complicated like curves. Like if you have one sphere, right? Okay, then it's like, oh, it's very easy to see how the curves are. But like you add a bunch of things, it's like, oh, I don't know what's going on anymore. Yeah, in that case, if you're just trying to simulate things,
Winter's come on.
I would just search directly for like GR simulation code snippets, just to like, that'll probably be the best way, because often the people who like code the things, like they did all the research, and then they'll like give you a nice summary of all the stuff you need to know in terms of like theory. That's my advice personally. But yeah.
good luck, Akash. You are well beyond anything that I can help you with at this point. Okay, you want to keep watching?
And no,
Yeah.
and no matter how much
Definitely.
from the beasts sets us apart from, it's what sets us characteristic. It's what characteristic. It's what sets us apart from the beasts. And no matter how much you disagree with someone about God or Obama or Chris Hemsworth, you can at least grant that they are not beasts. Because most of the time, at least, people can be persuaded by arguments. You use arguments all the time, in the comments, at family dinners, with your friends. You probably just don't think of them the same way that philosophers do. When you try and convince your parents to loan you the car, or when you're talking out the crash course to your friends, you are using arguments. Thanks, by the way. Each time you tell someone to do or believe something, or when you're explaining why you do or believe something, you are giving an argument. The problem is, the vast majority of people aren't really good at arguments. We tend to confuse making a good argument with like having witty comebacks or just making your points more loudly and angrily instead of building a case on a solid foundation of logic, which can be harder than it sounds. But learning about arguments and strong reasoning will not only make you a better philosopher, it will also set you up to be a more persuasive person, someone who people will listen to, someone who's convincing. So yeah, these skills are beneficial no matter what you want to do with your life, so you might as well know how to argue properly. If you want to learn how to argue, then you should probably start around 2400 years ago when Plato was laying out how reason can and should function in the human mind. He believed that we all have what he called a tripartite soul, what you might think of as yourself or your psyche divided into three parts. First, there's the rational or logical part of the soul, which represents cool reason. This is the aspect of yourself that seeks the truth and is swayed by facts and arguments. When you decide to stop eating bacon for 2 meals a day because, as delicious as it is, it's bad for you, then you make that decision with the guidance of the rational part of your soul. But then there's the spirited aspect, often described as the emotional part of the self, although that doesn't really quite capture it. The spirited soul isn't just about feeling, it's also about how your feelings fuel your actions. It's the part that responds in righteous anger at injustice, the part that drives your ambition and calls upon you to protect others. It gives you a sense of honor and duty and is swayed by sympathy. So if you decide to stop eating bacon because you just finished reading Charlotte's Web and now you're in love with Wilbur, then you're being guided by the spirited part of your soul. But we share the next part of our soul with other animals, be they pig or moose or aardvark. The appetitive part is what drives you to eat, have sex, and protect yourself from danger. It is swayed by temptations that are carnal and visceral. So at those times when you go ahead and just eat all the bacon because it just smells so dang good, the appetitive aspect of your soul is in control. Now, Plato believed that the best human beings, and I should point out here that Plato most definitely did believe that some people were better than others,
are always ruled by the rational part of their soul because it works to keep the spirited and the appetitive parts in check. People who allow themselves to be ruled by their spirited or appetitive selves are base, he believed, and not fully, properly human. Now, most of us don't buy into the concept of the tripartite soul anymore, or the idea that some humans are less human than others, but we do understand that we're all motivated by physical desires, emotional impulses, and rational arguments. And philosophers continue to agree with Plato that reason should be in the driver's seat. So how do you know if you're good at it? How can you test your reasoning? Well, let's head over to the thought bubble for some flash philosophy. Throughout this course, we're going to apply our philosophical skills by pondering puzzles, paradoxes, and thought experiments. Because remember, philosophers love thinking about questions, especially ones that don't have ready answers. So think of these exercises as philosophical wind sprints, quick tests of your mental abilities. And here's a doozy from 20th century British thinker Bertrand Russell, one of the pioneers of what's known as analytic philosophy. Say there's a town in which all men are required by law to be clean-shaven. This town has only one barber, a man who must follow strict rules. Rule number 1, he must shave all men who do not shave themselves. Rule number 2, he must not shave any man who does shave himself. It's the nightmare of every libertarian and every mustachioed hipster, but here's the question. Does the barber shave himself? Because think about it, the barber only shaves men who don't shave themselves, so if he does shave himself, then he must not, because the barber's not allowed to shave guys who shave themselves. But if he doesn't shave himself, then he has to be shaved by the barber, because that's the law. Russell came up with this puzzle to illustrate the fact that a group must always be a member of itself. That means, in this case, that all men who shave themselves has to include every guy who shaves himself, including the barber. Otherwise, the logic that dictates the group's existence just doesn't hold up. And if the barber is a logical impossibility, then he can't exist, which means the reasoning behind his existence is inherently flawed. And philosophy doesn't tolerate flawed reasoning. So how do we make sure that we're ruled by good, sound, not flawed reason? By perfecting the art of the argument. An argument in philosophy isn't just a shouting match. Instead, philosophers maintain that your beliefs should always be backed up by reasons, which we call premises. Premises form the structure of your argument. They offer evidence for your belief, and you can have as many premises as you like as long as they support your conclusion, which is the thing that you actually believe. So let's dissect the anatomy of an argument. There are actually several different species of arguments. Probably the most familiar and the easiest to carry out is the deductive argument. The main rule of a deductive argument is if your premises are true, then your conclusion must be true. And knowing that something is actually true is very rare and awesome. So here's a boiled down version of a good deductive argument. Premise 1, all humans are mortal. Premise 2, Socrates is human. Conclusion, Socrates is mortal. This kind of reasoning, where one fact leads to another, is called entailment. Once we know that all humans are mortal and that Socrates is human, those facts entail that Socrates is mortal. Deduction begins with the general, in this case what we know about human mortality, and reasons down to the specific, Socrates in particular. What's great about deductive arguments is that the truth of the premises must lead to the truth of the
conclusion. When this happens, we say that the argument is valid. There's no way for the conclusion to be false if the premises are true. Now check out this argument. All humans are mortal, Socrates is a human, therefore Socrates was Plato's teacher. That argument is invalid because nothing about human mortality can prove that Socrates was Plato's teacher. As you might have noticed, there are plenty of mortal humans who never taught Plato. What's interesting though is that this argument does happen to have a true conclusion, which leads us to another issue, and that is validity is not the same as truth. All valid really means is that if the premises are true, then your conclusion can't be false. But that doesn't mean that your premises prove your conclusion to be correct. Like in the case of whether Socrates was Plato's teacher, the premises are true and the conclusion is true, but the argument is still not valid because the premises don't in any way prove the conclusion. It just happens to be true. So if your premises don't guarantee the truth of your conclusion, then you can end up with some really crappy arguments, like this one. All cats are mammals. I'm a mammal, therefore I'm a cat. As much as part of me would like to be my cat, this is invalid because the conclusion doesn't entail from the premises at all. I mean, all cats are mammals, but all mammals aren't cats, which means there are such things as non-cat mammals, which I am just one example of. And it probably goes without saying, but you can have a perfectly valid argument and still have a false conclusion if any of your premises are false. For example, all humans have tails, my brother John is a human, therefore John Green has a tail. The argument is totally valid because the premises entail the conclusion. The reasoning totally stands up. It's just that one of the premises is flawed. Since I'm reasonably certain that John doesn't have a tail, I've seen him in a bathing suit, this argument is not deductively sound. And a deductively sound argument is one that's free of formal flaws or defects. It's an argument whose premises are all true, and that's valid, which means its conclusion is guaranteed to be true. So, sound arguments should always be your goal. The reason that deduction is prized by philosophers and lots of other important kinds of thinkers is that it's the only kind of argument that can give you a real certainty. But it's limited, because it only works if you're starting with known true premises, which are hard to come by. And for what it's worth, deductive truths are usually pretty obvious. They don't tend to lead us to startling new information, like the fact that I'm not a cat or that John doesn't have a tail. So instead of starting with premises that are already certain, like deduction does, you're gonna have to know how to determine the truth of and your confidence in your premises. Which means you're gonna have to acquaint yourself with the other species of arguments, which we're gonna do next time. But today we talked about the value of reason, the structure of arguments, and we took a close look at one kind of argument, deductive reasoning. This episode of Crash Course Philosophy is made possible by...
Okay, that one's pretty standard.
Yeah, so this next one is one last logic one, and then you get into like actual like epistemology.
Okay.
So that'll be pretty good.
Yeah,
This is
I
the
feel like
last
the
logic
logic
one.
stuff is pretty obvious. It's like a little straightforward, right?
Yeah, definitely.
1 + 1 = 2 kind of thing.
Yeah, this one is titled Induction and Abduction.
Crash Course Philosophy is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace, share your passion with the world.
How do you know that aspirin will take care of your headache? Why do you really want to see that new Marvel movie, even though you haven't heard anything about it, good or bad? Your ability to do things like predict how a medication will affect you, or what movie you might like, or even things like what the perfect gift might be for your best friend, or what's the fastest way to get to campus. All of this stuff you know through induction. Deductive arguments are great because they give us certain answers. But unfortunately, much of the world cannot be summed up in a neat deductive proof. Deduction requires a fair amount of general information to give you a specific conclusion that is frankly, probably kind of obvious. So philosophy, and basically, life as well, require that you have other ways of reasoning. In addition to knowing how one fact leads to another, you also need to take what you've experienced before and use that to predict what might happen in the future. And you need to be able to rule out what can't be true so you can focus on what can. Through these kinds of reasoning, you're not only able to figure out stuff like how to fix your headache and why your roommate might be acting weird, you can also come up with better, more skillful arguments and counter-arguments, which are some of the most important maneuvers in the philosophical game. And maybe the best part is, you already know how to use these techniques. In fact, I bet you used them this very day. You know this. If you possess any ability to really predict the future, it lies in your ability to reason inductively. Inductive reasoning relies on the predictability of nature to reveal that the future is likely to resemble the past, often in important ways. For example, there's tons of research to support the knowledge that aspirin, acetylsalicylic acid, is an effective treatment for pain, like headaches. And you probably have personal experience with the effects of aspirin too. So you believe that this aspirin tablet will cure the headache you have right now because countless aspirin tablets have cured countless headaches in the past. Likewise, you want to see the new Marvel movie because you liked most of the other ones, so you believe that they'll continue to deliver for you entertainment-wise. But it's important to remember that unlike deduction, where true premises entail true conclusions, inductive premises only mean that the conclusion is likely to be true. Inductive arguments don't provide you with certainty. Instead, they work in terms of probabilities. And they're useful for more than just predicting what's going to happen. For example, most men in ancient Athens had beards. Socrates was a man who lived in ancient Athens. Therefore, Socrates probably had a beard. This is an inductive argument because it starts with what we already know about the grooming habits of ancient Athenian men and about the time and place in which Socrates lived, and makes an educated guess based on that information. There's no guarantee that the conclusion is correct, but what's known would seem to support it. Reasoning like this is incredibly useful, which is why it's so common, but there's also a problem. The future doesn't always resemble the past, and every pattern has its outliers. So induction always has the potential to produce false results. Aspirin might not work on a really bad headache, the new Marvel movie might be awful, and yeah, maybe a specific guy in Athens had a beard, but it's possible he didn't. While the world tends to work according to predictable rules, sometimes those rules are violated. And you know what you need when that happens? A little flash philosophy. Off to the thought bubble. Contemporary American philosopher Nelson Goodman confronts the problems with induction using a thought exercise about a hypothetical substance called grue. According to Goodman's scenario, grue is anything that's the color green before a certain time, a time that we will call t. And another property of grue is that while it's green before time t, it's blue after it. Now let's assume that we're living in a time before t. T could happen 100 years from now or tomorrow, but we know that all the emeralds we've ever seen are green. So inductive reasoning lets us conclude that all emeralds are green and will remain green after time t, since emeralds have never been known to change color. But all emeralds are grue because it's not yet time t and they're green, which is part of the definition of grue. So we have no choice but to conclude that emeralds will be blue after time t arrives. Now we've got a problem, because inductive reasoning has led us to conclude that emeralds will be blue after time t. But inductive reasoning also tells us that they'll remain green. Goodman's riddle reminds us that inductive evidence can be flawed or contradictory. It can make you think that you can predict the future when, of course, you can't. So there are times when you need to get at the truth in other ways, like by eliminating what's obviously not true and considering what's most likely. And for this, we turn our attention to one of the most important philosophical figures of 19th century England, Sherlock Holmes. In Chapter 6 of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's The Sign of the Four, Mr. Holmes says, and I quote, "When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." This is probably the best, most succinct description ever given of the kind of reasoning known as abduction. Which I know sounds like we're talking about kidnapping or something, but abduction is a thought process sometimes described as inference to the best explanation. Abduction doesn't reason straight from a premise to a conclusion, as we've seen in deduction and induction. Instead, it reasons by ruling out possible explanations until you're left with the most plausible one given the evidence. Consider this. Anna told you she failed her physics midterm. Anna hasn't been in physics class since your teacher graded the exams. Anna has been in sociology class, which meets right after physics. Anna dropped physics. Now, with only these premises, we can't deductively or inductively prove our conclusion, that she dropped physics. But it's a justifiable conclusion because given what we know, dropping the class is the most plausible explanation of events. We know she's not sick because she's still going to sociology, and we know she had a good reason to withdraw from the class because she was unlikely to pass. Concluding that she dropped the course makes the most tidy use of our information without leaving any loose ends. So let's look at another one. You and your roommate ate sushi last night. You both wake up with violent stomach aches. You and your roommate ate some bad sushi. The mere fact that you're both sick doesn't prove that the sushi caused the sickness, but given that you both ate the same thing and you both have the same symptoms, absent other information like that a stomach virus is going around your dorm, the best explanation is that the sushi caused your intestinal anguish. Now, like induction, abduction doesn't give us certainty, but it is a really useful way to get through puzzling situations when you don't have clear evidence from the past to help you out. Doctors use abduction a lot when they're diagnosing illnesses witnesses, and detectives, of course, use it when piecing together evidence. You probably use it pretty often too. Just beware, because abduction must be used carefully. It uses only information you have at hand. That's why doctors and detectives work so hard to dig up more data and recreate events from the past so they can help draw better conclusions. Alright, now that we've looked at some argument types, let's find out how philosophers use arguments to interact with each other. Because philosophers don't argue like other people do. It's not like the conversation you have around the dinner table about whether the Patriots are better than the Seahawks or why plain M&Ms are superior to peanut, which is clearly a preposterous position to take. Philosophers hold each other to different, higher standards. They don't teach each other to get away with saying, I reject your argument because I don't like its conclusion, or that's preposterous, peanut M&Ms are so good. Instead, if you disagree with a conclusion, you need to give reasons, just like the first person did when they made their case. Both people involved in this kind of exchange are known as interlocutors, because we have to name everything. The first one advances an argument, and the second one can either accept it or offer a counter-argument, which is just what it sounds like, an argument offered in opposition to another argument. Think back to Socrates and the beard. You think Socrates had a beard, and your reasoning is that most men in his time and place had them. I, however, think you're wrong, so I give you a counter-argument. Gorgias, a contemporary of Socrates, said Socrates couldn't grow a beard and that he would sneak into barbershops and steal discarded clippings to fashion fake beards for himself. Therefore, Socrates didn't have a real beard. And I just want to point out that this is an actual philosophy conspiracy theory. Gorgias was a real guy who differed with Socrates on many things, and the dispute was said to have gotten personal. According to accounts at the time, Gorgias actually spread the rumor that Socrates wore like a beard wig in an effort to shame and discredit his rival. I mean, how could you be a good thinker if you weren't a good beard grower? Gorgias's gossip didn't go over well with everyone, and in this instance, let's say you are skeptical about it too. So you counter my counter-argument with a counter-counter-argument. Gorgias was known for being a gossip and for hating Socrates and trying to make him look bad. His fake beard tale seems wildly unlikely, therefore we can't take Gorgias' statement seriously, so we should fall back on the best information we have, which is that most of the men in his time and place had beards. And as you can see, arguments of different styles can be used in the same exchange. Like, the original argument about Socrates probably having a beard was inductive, but this last counter-argument is abductive, and that's fine. Arguments are meant to be useful, so we don't have to use the same kind of reasoning when we argue. This way of exchanging ideas through dialogue was popularized by Socrates, and so has become known as the Socratic method. Socrates thought dialogue was the best way to learn and to get at truth. And it's important to note that while philosophers have a reputation for being an argumentative lot, they don't think of the Socratic method as something that results in a winner and a loser. Rather, it's an exercise that brings both interlocutors closer to the truth. The goal of the philosopher is not to win, but to find truth, so you shouldn't be disappointed if someone presents a counter-argument that you can't find a response to. When that happens, a good philosopher will be grateful to their interlocutor for helping them reject false beliefs and build stronger ones. Today, you learned about two more types of philosophical reasoning, induction and abduction. You've seen their strengths and their weaknesses, and you've also learned about counter-arguments and the Socratic method. This episode of Crash Course Philosophy is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace helps to create websites, blogs, or online stores for you and your ideas. Websites look professionally designed regardless of skill level, no coding required. Try Squarespace at squarespace.com/Crash Course for a special offer. Crash Course Philosophy is produced in association with PBS Digital Studios.
Okay.
Alright, so this next one's going to be actual, like, philosophical questions now.
Okay.
It's called The Nature of Reality and Leonardo DiCaprio, so it'll be interesting.
Wonder why.
Definitely, the more we go into it, the more, like, it'll be questions. I think the first few videos will be, like, you know, just getting the basis for vocabulary and stuff that we can use.
Yeah, they're just trying to set the stage because probably like every philosophical argument, it follows similar patterns and just trying to.
Exactly.
It's also the Crash Courses, the way they do their videos is very much based off of like what you learn in courses, right? Like if you take like a college course on philosophy, you're going to learn the different kinds of like logical arguments. So.
Yeah. All right.
Crash Course Philosophy is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace. Share your passion with the world.
We've spent a couple of lessons talking about how philosophers reason. Now, it's time to do some actual philosophy. One of the most important hallmarks of philosophical thought is that you should never take things at face value. You should always be willing to accept that there's more to the world than meets the eye. Because whatever truth seems obvious today might turn out to be not so true at all. It's one of the more daunting pursuits in philosophy, pondering what's really real as opposed to what you think is real and how you could ever know the difference. Fortunately, there are some guides who can help you on your journey when you're exploring the nature of reality. And you know who's really helpful here? Leonardo DiCaprio. I mean, I guess you could say that a lot of actors can transport you to another reality if they're good enough, but that's not what I mean. I'm talking about Inception, that movie where Leo plays a thief who steals ideas from people by invading their dreams. A super handy ability if you want to say steal corporate secrets from a CEO or military plans from a head of state. But after a while, it becomes hard for some members of Leo's team to tell the difference between one dream and another, or to discern dreams from reality. The whole film is populated with people who live in a dream world, convinced they're living real life. To them, the dream is all there is. It has become their reality. But from the perspective of those outside the dream, who see their sleeping bodies, the reality they're chasing is simply false. It's a real cool premise for a movie. I haven't ruined it for you. You can still watch it. And the fact is, the same concept has been around for thousands of years. The basic question that Inception asks has vexed philosophers all the way back to the very roots of Western philosophy. Is it possible that my current reality isn't real at all? And before we had Leo DiCaprio to walk us through this question, we had Plato. Around 2,400 years ago, Plato wrote his famous book, The Republic, in which he describes probably better than anyone before or since the nature of reality.
I'm assuming that this video is where they're going to talk about the I think therefore I am, right? That's my guess. Like Descartes. Did you pause it or did I?
Oh, sorry, yeah, I was muted. No, I think the next one is.
Oh, okay. Because this one's about the nature of reality. Well, okay, the nature of reality. Maybe not. Okay.
Well,
okay.
I think the next few are about the nature of reality. The next few, like 4 or 5.
Yeah.
All right, I'll play it now. But yeah, this one's about Plato's cave.
Okay.
Earth in a dark cave facing a blank wall. All kinds of people and objects passed behind the prisoners, and a fire cast the shadows of those things onto the wall in front of the prisoners. These shadow images are all the prisoners ever see, so they come to understand the shadows as reality. Now just hold up a minute and imagine what your view of the world would be like if all you've ever seen are shadows. You wouldn't know that there was anything more. 3D wouldn't even be a concept for you. The prisoners spend their whole lives understanding only this shadow reality, until one day one of them escapes from his chains and crawls into the daylight. After spending a lifetime in firelit darkness, the man is blinded by the sun at first, but in time he comes to see the things outside of the cave are far more real than the shadow images that he once took for reality. They have more substance, they occupy an extra dimension. Think about how that would feel to suddenly realize that everything you believed just minutes ago turned out to be merely faint outlines of reality. This is what happens to a lot of the characters who inhabit the world of Inception. Once they realize there can be multiple layers of reality, they never look at the world around them the same way again, and for many of them, the experience becomes intoxicating. This is also what happens to Plato's escaped prisoner. He goes back into the cave to tell his friends the exciting news about what he's found, but the conversation doesn't go the way he thinks it will. He expects them to be amazed by his discovery. He figures they'll be as eager to join him as he is anxious to get back. But they all think he's crazy. As far as they're concerned, he's babbling about some higher reality that they've never seen or heard of or have any evidence for. To make matters worse, going back into the firelit cave after being in the sunlight temporarily blinds the man again. So from his friend's perspective, his journey into the outside world has actually damaged him, because now he can't even see the shadow images that were once his whole world. Now, you don't have to be Plato or Christopher Nolan to dream this stuff up. In fact, you might have experienced a diluted version of this kind of reality shock for yourself. For example, do you remember your first teddy bear? That bear was, philosophically speaking, your only contact with and your only way of understanding the concept of a bear. Then one day you went to a zoo or a wildlife refuge or a national park and you saw an actual bear. And suddenly you realize that your previous understanding of bear was way off. Bears don't have little button eyes and smiles made of thread. They're not soft. You couldn't hug one. The bear you spent your first years of life snuggling with was just a shadowy imitation of the reality of bareness. Now check out this somewhat more mature example. Maybe you were the first member of your tweeny group of friends to discover the wonders of romantic attraction. You might have felt like your eyes were open to a whole new world that your pals were still blind to. And when you tried to explain to them what had happened to you and how you felt, they probably thought you were crazy, and the feeling was probably mutual. And this is what our poor protagonist goes through as he re-enters the cave. So why does Plato tell us this story? It's not just about the little aha moments when we discovered that bears and boys were not what we once thought they were. It's more than that. Plato wants us to see that we, right now, are prisoners in a cave. Everything in our world is actually a mere shadow of a higher reality. Just as the man in the story once mistook shadows for real things, we are currently prisoners in a cave of our own. But rather than mistaking shadows for the material objects of the ordinary world, our mistake is thinking that the material objects of the ordinary world are the most real things. In fact, Plato says, the physical world that we think is the most real is actually a mere shadow of a higher truth. If this surprises you, think about how many beliefs were once accepted as absolute fact only to later turn out to be completely false. The shape of the earth, the idea that the earth was the center of the universe, the belief that heroin and tobacco and lobotomies were good for people. Those so-called facts turned out to be far from the truth. So there's a lot packed into this little story. Plato is urging you to consider that the world is not really as it seems, and making a statement about philosophy. Doing philosophy is hard. Accepting that much of...
So I think at this point, I think the idea of like the Plato's cave thing is like the modern sort of version of that. I feel like is the idea of I don't know. I was trying to think. I was listening to something the other day about this idea of like we can't actually like what like the word real is kind of like a misnomer. Like because like saying the idea of like what is actually real is it doesn't really make sense to say that because everything that we experience is going to depend upon our perspective, right? And like our brain's interpretation of what we're seeing.
Yeah, so I don't think the question doesn't make sense. I think it's a fine question. I do think it means different. The question itself is a different question if you ask it in different contexts. I think philosophy has good tools for like describing what are those contexts. Then, so what is my experience, or what is going to be objectively true, and then how do you define objective? Does objective just mean verifiable repeatedly? Well, that's actually like in a few videos from now. Empiricism versus skepticism or rationalism.
Right.
But I think you can still ask that question. It's just like part of that. So answering that question is answering what you mean by real. It's not like there's a blanket word real. For all things, they would all be related in some way. That's why we would use the same word real for all of those different notions. But I agree that like just asking what is most real is not specific enough to have an answer.
Yeah, I think that's the part where I end up getting a little confused because I to me when I think like when the idea of like what is real, maybe let's just keep playing it.
Yeah.
Much of what you've always accepting that much hard. Accepting is hard. Philosophy. Doing philosophy is hard. Accepting that much of what you've always believed might actually be false can make you uncomfortable. You might feel temporarily blinded. You may learn just enough to know that your old beliefs aren't reliable, but you don't yet know enough to feel comfortable with these new ideas either. What's more, your old friends who aren't on this journey with you might think you've lost your mind. Or they might take you for an arrogant, pedantic jerk who thinks they have all the answers. But philosophy is also awesome, because once you get through the growing pains, you can see things in a new way, and you can see through things that used to fool you. And that brings us to another puzzle. Consider this argument. No cat has two tails. Every cat has one more tail than no cat. Therefore, every cat has 3 tails. Now you're probably thinking, that's just clearly wrong. That's not much of a puzzle. I mean, the 2 premises sound right enough, but the conclusion is what? This puzzle exploits the strangeness in the language that we use to discuss certain ideas, specifically the ideas of nothingness, absence, or emptiness. In premise 1, no cat refers to an absence of cats. Think about things with 2 tails, and none of those things you think of are cats because you probably can't even think of anything with 2 tails. But in premise 2, the language tricks us into understanding no cat as an existent thing rather than an absence of a thing. The way it's phrased, no cat could conceivably be that elusive creature that has 2 tails. So this leads us to the conclusion that if the no cat has 2 tails and every cat has 1 more tail than it does, then every cat must have 3 tails, which is just wrong. And it takes a moment to understand the source of our confusion. The conclusion is faulty because it mistakes the absence of something for the presence of something. But it strikes us as plausible on some level because language has duped us into considering a reality where a creature called no cat with 2 tails is actually a thing. Figuring out puzzles like this is kind of like flipping a switch. First, you're confused, and then the cause of the confusion seems obvious. It's just a matter of sorting through what's really real. And Plato thinks philosophy is like that too. Going from the darkness into the light is both disorienting and rewarding. It's kind of too bad in this case though, because a cat with 3 tails, I'd kind of like to see that. Though, to be honest, I mostly just like looking at any cat. And with that, we wrap up this episode of Crash Course Philosophy. Today, we learned about Plato's famous myth of the cave, questioned the relationship between appearance and reality, and talked about the process of philosophical discovery. Next time, we're going to disappear even deeper into the hole of shadow and disbelief, all in the hopes of eventually emerging into the light. This episode of Crash Course Philosophy is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace helps to create websites, blogs, or online stores for you and your ideas. Websites look professionally designed regardless of skill level, no connection with PBS Digital.
Oh my
Right.
Usually not.
Okay. Usually not, right? Okay. All right. This is skepticism.
Why does this guy keep coming here?
Crash Course Philosophy is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace, share your passion with the world.
A film for your philosophical consideration. The Matrix. You gotta remember the humans floating around in the vats of KY jelly, tubes and wires keeping them alive, stimulating their brains to make them believe that they were experiencing the real world, the world we all think we know. Well, almost 20-year-old spoiler alert here, some of them come out and find that the real world was a desolate wasteland and the lives everyone thought they were living were just fabrications fed into their brains. A select few were rescued from the illusion, but some of them were so unhappy in the real world that they chose to return to the illusion. But Neo and the others who chose to stay and fight were the philosophical heroes of the movie, choosing truth at the cost of comfort and happiness. After watching The Matrix, you might have found yourself wondering, could this be true? Could we possibly be stuck in a dream world of someone else's making with no way to tell that our reality isn't real at all? If so, you are not the first person to have wondered about these things. In fact, the original Neo, the guy who really went into battle against the matrix of illusion in order to defend the truth, he was a 17th century mathematician named Rene. Last time we talked about Plato and his belief that the ordinary reality of the material world is only a shadowy approximation of ultimate reality. Socrates, meanwhile, who was widely believed to be the wisest man in Athens, fretted about how little he knew. Philosophers spend a lot of time obsessing about knowledge, wishing they knew more, and worrying that they're wrong about what they think they know. They even, if you remember from the first episode, have a fancy name for the study of knowledge, epistemology. The philosopher who gets the gold star for taking this how do I know what I know paranoia to astonishing levels is the early modern philosopher, scientist, and mathematician.
Wait, hold on, let me pause real quick. Let me ask you a question. Do you think there is such a thing as ultimate reality?
I do, yeah.
Ooh, okay.
I find myself hard-pressed to not believe in such a thing after studying math.
So what does that even mean to you, like an ultimate reality?
I think mathematical truths are real in a fundamental sense. I mean, I guess saying in a fundamental sense is like just recapitulating that they're real, but reality has to be described in
like when I say like ultimate reality, I think what I'm trying to get at is like there's something, there's like the way the world actually the way the universe or the way reality actually is, as like a matter
Yeah.
of fact, and not just an interpretation of that or an approximation, but there is some way that if you could access it
yes.
or see it, you would be like, this is actually like objectively the truth
Yes,
of
yeah.
reality. Like it actually is this. It's not just an
I
interpretation.
don't know if there's necessarily one ultimate reality as in singular.
Mhm.
I think there is a mathematical reality, and then there's also
Okay.
a physical reality, and the physical reality would be a sort of reductionistic, like, understanding of essentially what is the pursuit of physics, right? To just understand this very reductionistic model of the world, like a material. So I think you can say that there is a reality in that sense that's true, and there is also a separate but related reality that is the mathematical, formal, abstract reality. And then there are also other types of realities too. I would say the reality of experience is undeniable. I that's actually the point of this video, is that
I think therefore I am.
yeah. I think that actually is very much overlooked by a lot of, I would say, materialist philosophies. That there's only material, and that consciousness is just an empty phenomena of circuits. Like, I think you can't be a scientist without first acknowledging that you're a person, and you can't be a person, or you can't acknowledge that you're a person without acknowledgement. And acknowledgement is in itself, thinking. So there's no way to establish any materialistic theory, for example, without first admitting the reality of your own experience, in the sense that there is an experience. So in that sense, there's a reality there too, for example. So I think there are different types of realities, and they mean different things. I mean, it's sort of
Okay.
a common way it's phrased that there are three realities. There's the physical reality, the mathematical reality, and the reality of the mind. So yeah, I do think that, like, in some sense, each of those, there's an ultimate version of that, and in the sense that to be more ultimate means to be more valid or true. Right, so there is, like, some existent model that is accurate 100% in some way, for physics, for example. If that's the question you're asking.
Kinda, yeah. But I almost am like, how can we know? How is that even something that we can know?
That's a really good question. I have my own, like, sort of answer. It's not like the sort of classical answer though. But my answer is like, basically there are a lot of reasons. One I would say is that we're evolved for that, in the sense that it would not be evolutionarily beneficial for us if the act of seeking out more information was not beneficial for us. Right, so essentially, is learning an evolutionary benefit? I would say experimentally we can show that to be true.
Sure.
Right.
That I
And
can
this is
agree
an
with.
induction, right? This is not deduction, right? But because, some
sure,
people
yeah.
do argue science is not good, ultimately good. The pursuit of truth is ultimately good because it creates medicine, but it also creates nuclear bombs, for example, right? That's still it's still in debate, up for debate. But I
Sure,
would
yeah,
say
that's
it's,
true. Yeah.
it's an ethical claim. I think it's an ethical claim that grew out of essentially the ethical world and the moral world of the pre-Renaissance era, that the truth is good fundamentally, as opposed to just a thing.
Well,
that
sure,
allows us to
but
say-
again, like when we talk about the truth, again, I would come back to like that's where I was kind of getting at before. Like the
Right.
truth, and to an extent, like it makes sense that like a truth for like humans that's beneficial for our survival. So are you of the opinion that
this
like
is-
because
This
it's
is actually
beneficial,
a really good question.
it
Yeah,
has to be true?
No. Yeah, okay, I'm like yes and no in that. Depends on the context. But actually there's a you know, my big, you know, I follow this, you know, Mr. Psychologist man a lot. He did a talk with Richard Dawkins, particularly about this subject. He argued, I think validly, that the epistemology of a physicist and a biologist are mutually incoherent.
The epistemology of a physicist and a biologist are
and
mutually
I think that was
incoherent.
Yeah, I think Dawkins agreed with him to an extent. But it's essentially what you're getting at is that as the science you do in biology is very different than first principles physics, sort of, axiom 1, axiom 2, proof. Biology is much more like, here is the world, here's the data given, and that you have to extrapolate the sort of truth out of that. And studying biology will teach you that the biology that you are doing as a science isn't in itself like evolution, in the sense that the only thing you are studying is what is, in a sense, more beneficial. Or a better way to put it is that if you're a biologist, I'll say this is the definition of biologist. A biologist is a person who believes that every animal and life on Earth, including, you know, you, the biologist, was created through an evolutionary process. And if that's true, then, meaning if we accept the validity of that statement, so not to get meta here, but then you as a biologist cannot have an understanding of truth as such beyond just being evolutionary, like beneficial, like beyond just being like maximally sort of productive for my reproduction, or maximally beneficial for my reproduction.
Right.
You can, without, I'm not saying, I should rephrase that. You as a biologist cannot hold the view of truth of anything more than just that without taking another axiom.
So
you're
just to make sure I'm understanding you, like, are you saying that because I'm because as a biological organism, I'm a product of evolution, and evolution will have shaped me to pursue truth insofar as it helps me like reproduce and like pass on my genes. Therefore, there might be some fundamental truths that I don't have access to because I haven't evolved to have that access. Is that what you're saying?
This is the same idea, but the claim is the final claim is sort of the first thing you said. And it's really the way you do, if you're a biologist, so you're studying biology, and you see, wait, so the thing that sort of motivates what happens, the underlying principle of what happens, how the sort of ecosystem changes, is whatever becomes most reproductively viable, or rather viable for, you know, more reproduction, is the thing that happens more. Right. That's your sort of, that's an established principle that undergirds biology. Then from that, you realize that should apply to your own mind. That you, the person, when I say you, I don't mean you, Mr. Jens, I just mean this hypothetical biologist. You know, you, the person who's thinking about evolution, that thought that you're having also should follow that principle. Therefore, truth is nothing more. If you take no other axioms, truth is nothing more than just what is most beneficial in an evolutionary sense.
Right.
And I think there's an intermediate step in saying that there's a lot more to evolution than just like life. You know, like many systems can have like scarcity or constraints, and productivity sort of carries out in generation-like things, and then that's like essentially evolution. Like natural selection can occur in more than just actual like sort of Darwinian biology of life. So evolutionary processes and natural selective processes are very much more common in like all sorts of micro, like formation of stars would probably obey evolution to a degree, in the sense that there's some constrained resource, and the thing that, and in that case, the leading principle is whatever has the most mass is the thing that gets the most mass. For example, anyways, that's a bit off tangent, but by doing that, one would build up this understanding that, okay, everything orients around whatever is most maximally productive. That includes my contemplation about what is most productive. So therefore, I can't understand anything true beyond just what is most beneficial for me in the moment. So the claim is that I think it's a valid claim to say that most scientists and most biologists actually don't think that. And what Peterson claimed in that is that therefore you are taking another axiom of some fundamental ultimate truth that exists, irrespective of what is beneficial when doing that. So to tie it all back.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with any of that. Can you give me an example of like something else that a biologist would take on?
Yeah, I don't mean like a biologist or this is bio. I mean like this sort of biologist defined by the person who can only believe in evolutionary things from evolution.
Like
Right.
that evolution is like the
So-
fundamental process.
Yeah. So again, evolutionary, like if the world was generated by evolution, that is a very different type of truth that one can possess than if the world was generated by mechanistic processes of like sort of deterministic notions. That is going to be the difference between this video number 5 and video number 6. Rationalism is a very physics. That's why Newton said, "I owe everything to René Descartes." But rationalism, and when we think about this Newtonian method, is like, first principles, and then this must be true. This ergo that. That's very. It's often the word Newtonian physics is used to describe that sort of thinking. A lot of criticisms of sociology or economics, people say, it's not Newtonian physics. So that's in that sense. The reason they say that is because Newtonian physics is trying to be like, there's this ultimate thing that I can just derive. And there's big historical dichotomy placed between Newton and Darwin. And that was just essentially the language they were using to say that there's a difference between the type of science you do in Newtonian physics and the type of science you do in biology, which is that the world was not generated by mechanistic processes. It's generated by this complex process that obeys a law of evolution, and all I can do is make observations on the system that will obey the law of evolution. But because of that, I can only know what is beneficial through the evolutionary process to me at the moment. Does that make sense? I think if we want to have this discussion, it'd be better to have it after 2 videos from now.
Okay.
Because I think we'll have it'll be easier to talk, because I haven't seen this in a while, so I'm struggling to find words.
Okay, no, that's fine. We can go forward.
Yeah.
René Descartes. When you're a mathematician, scientist, and philosopher, modern philosopher, early modern philosopher, scientist, and mathematician, René Descartes. When you watch The Matrix, you should congratulate the Wachowskis for giving us such a great sci-fi adventure story. But you should also remember that the archetype of the story actually has its roots all the way back in the writings of Descartes in the early 1600s. For a story like The Matrix to get off the ground, the audience has to be willing to entertain some level of skepticism. And a skeptic is someone who questions whether it's possible to know anything with certainty. And Descartes was the Mac Daddy of all skeptics. He was so skeptical we named a form of skepticism after him, Cartesian skepticism. Why was Descartes so skeptical? Well, he realized that many of the beliefs he used to hold were actually false. We all go through this. It's part of what we call growing up, learning those horrible truths about Santa and the Tooth Fairy. That you can't actually buy everything you want and need for just $100. That your parents don't really have all the answers. But realizing that he used to believe things that were false really got Descartes to thinking, because when he believed those things, he didn't realize they were false. So what if some of the things he still believed were also false and he just hadn't realized it yet? How could he know that his beliefs were true? Well, after a bit of a freak out, Descartes realized that the only way to make sure he wasn't holding any false beliefs was to disbelieve everything, at least temporarily. He offered this as an analogy. Imagine you have a basket of apples, and you're concerned that some of the apples might be rotten. Since the rot could spread and ruin the fresh apples, the only way to make sure there's no rot in the basket is to dump out all the fruit, inspect each apple in turn, and return only the fresh apples to the basket. Knowing that just like rotten fruit, a rotten idea can spread and infect all the ideas around it, Descartes upended the apple basket of his beliefs and decided to start from scratch. If he examined each possible belief carefully and only accepted those about which there could be no doubt, then he'd know he was only believing true things. So Descartes began the arduous task of examining his beliefs one by one. He started with empirical beliefs, things we come to know directly through the use of our senses. And many of us think that our senses are the most reliable source of information. If I can see it, hear it, touch it, taste it, smell it, I must know it, right? Not so much. Descartes pointed out that our senses fail us all the time. You rush to catch up to a friend and realize as she turns around that your eyes played some tricks on you and you've just tapped on the shoulder of a perfect stranger. Food tastes wrong when you're sick. Drink too much and you feel like the room is spinning. Water that's room temperature feels hot when you come inside after playing in the snow. The list goes on. You can probably think of countless times where your senses gave you faulty information. And once you realize that, how can you ever trust your senses again? And for Descartes, disbeliever of everything, it got worse. Have you ever had a dream so vivid you thought you were awake? You've probably had that dream when you were dreaming, or you dreamed that you woke up from a dream, but in fact were still in the dream. Not everyone has had these experiences, but many of us have, and given that we don't always know that we're dreaming while it's happening, how do we know we're not dreaming right now? Maybe you just think you're watching Crash Course, but in fact you're cozied up in bed, dreaming about me. Which, hey, like, who could blame you? But really, when you think about it, can you be sure that it's not the case? Now, you might be thinking, okay, sure, I probably deceive myself from time to time without knowing I'm doing it, but dreams end, and when I wake up, I realize that what I thought I was experiencing was all in my head. And the same is true for when my senses let me down. Those are just temporary instances isolated to a particular situation. As soon as the situation changes, I can realize that my experience was false. This quality, the ability to check in with yourself and figure out that you're experiencing a deception, describes what Descartes called local doubts. Those are doubts about a particular sense experience or some other occurrence at a particular point in time. Step out of that point and you can check to determine if you've been deceived. But what if everything is a deception? What if everyone is experiencing the same false reality from birth until death? What if nothing is as it seems, just like in the Matrix? This type of doubt, the kind you can't step out of and thus can't check, is called global doubt, and it's the subject of this week's Flash Philosophy. Let's go to the thought bubble. Philosopher Bertrand Russell illustrated the concept of global doubt with this troubling thought. What if the universe was created just 5 minutes ago? In this scenario, known as the 5-minute hypothesis, the creator of the universe could have designed many elements of the world to make them appear pre-worn, so as to seem old. From dinosaur bones fashioned by the creator and planted for us to find, to that scar on your knee put there by the creator along with the preloaded false memory of how you got it. It seems crazy, but there's no way to prove that it isn't the case. The question for Russell was, does it matter? Descartes thought it did, but as a good Catholic, he couldn't fathom a world in which God would plant globally false beliefs in all of our minds. So instead, he posited the existence of an evil genius whose purpose in life was to deceive us, and who was clever enough to do it. Descartes didn't actually think such a being was likely to exist, but he realized there was no way to rule out his existence, and as long as the evil genius was possible, he worried that we were all stuck. Stuck in a radical skepticism in which we really can't trust any of our beliefs. Everything we believe, every sense experience, every thought, they could all have been put in our minds by the evil genius who created an illusory world so seamless we'd have no way of detecting the illusion. Just like the machines created for the characters in the Matrix. Descartes was at the point of despair. But then he realized something. He had cause to doubt everything. Everything except the fact that he was doubting. He knew he was doubting. He could be sure of that. And if he was doubting, then he must exist, at least as a thinking thing. After all, a doubt is a thought, and if there is a thought, there must be a thinker having those thoughts. So Descartes decided that he couldn't know that he had a body. What he believed to be his body could have been part of the evil genius's deception, but he must have a mind, or he couldn't be having these thoughts. This was Descartes' aha moment. In his book, Meditations on First Philosophy, he declared, "Cogito ergo sum." I think, therefore I am. It's one of the most famous realizations in philosophy. I cannot doubt my own existence. I can doubt everything else, but I can't doubt that I am, bare minimum, a mind having thoughts. This was Descartes' foundational belief, the first belief he put back in his apple basket. And from there, he figured he could build back up to more certain beliefs. Once he was certain that he was a thinking thing, he began examining his thoughts. And one of his most clear thoughts, what he called a clear and distinct idea, was that God exists. He gave an argument for this, which we're going to examine in a later episode. But for now, take my word for it, it's got some problems. And from there, he considered his beliefs about the physical world and concluded that it, too, actually exists. Ultimately, he determined God wouldn't allow him to have clear and distinct ideas that were false without some way to detect his own error. So he concluded the evil genius is not actually fabricating lies that consume our every waking moment. Descartes managed to reason from cogito all the way back up to having basically all the beliefs he started with back in his apple basket, which is the story of how René Descartes, with the power of skepticism, defeated the threat of the evil genius. Much like how Neo ultimately short-circuited the Matrix, though considerably less impressive to watch, I imagine. He found certainty through his discovery of the one belief that he simply couldn't doubt, his own existence as a thinking thing. But there is a lot of debate among philosophers as to whether Descartes actually manages to justifiably believe anything other than that he exists as a thinking thing. And we'll talk more about that next time. This episode of Crash Course Philosophy is made possible by Squarespace.
Yeah, I don't know how he got from I think, therefore I am, all the way back up to like everything else. It seems kind of like...
Well, in short, I think it's a later video, but in short, it's basically you need a little... If you take God's existence, and he gives an argument, like he said, but if you take a sort of omnipotent, benevolent God, those four, the four classical attributes, then you have enough sort of information to like make judgments about the validity of like certainty, whether or not, well, for example, the one that was mentioned in the video was, well, there cannot be a good creator, not just a creator, but a good creator could not place global doubts or globally false information without a way to rectify that, because that would be purposely misleading. So,
Okay.
because that's a logical
that's fine.
impossibility, then you can make a determination about reality. So that's essentially, that's most of what he uses to determine that.
Okay, sounds pretty sketchy.
Alright, the next one is empiricism. So this is what we were just talking about a minute ago. It's a different notion of truth. Okay.
Crash Course Philosophy is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace. Share your passion with the world.
By the time we're done today, I just might have you questioning whether this apple is real or not. Think I can't do it? Give me about 10 minutes. I might have you wondering whether I'm a physical object or not. And the same goes for all this
sorry,
stuff.
can I,
and for
pause
your
for-
computer, and Nick behind the camera. And
Okay, thanks. Okay, sorry.
No worries.
camera, and you. How? By unleashing the power of empiricism. Last time, we learned about 17th century philosopher René Descartes and how he upended the apple basket that was his entire personal belief system and descended into a radical skepticism, only to emerge with his conviction that cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. This one idea, the fact that he was thinking, or really the fact that he was doubting, allowed him to build back up one by one more beliefs that he thought he could rely on. But in the end, most of the beliefs that Descartes ended up putting back into his intellectual apple basket had to do with the immaterial world. Like, he decided that he could believe that he existed as a thinking thing, and he believed that God existed. Ultimately, he lit upon the idea that some of our thoughts are clear and distinct in a way that somehow guarantees their truth. But a lot of philosophers disagreed. They argued that thinking on its own wasn't enough. Like, just because you're thinking doesn't mean that your thoughts correspond to material reality in any reliable way. Basically, Descartes' philosophical opponents thought that the cogito was a dead end. So here we start to see a split between two different understandings of how we can most reliably get to the nature of reality, and therefore truth. Both were responses to the constant questioning that is skepticism. On the one hand, there was rationalism, and on the other, empiricism. Descartes, like Plato before him, was a lover of reason. He met skepticism with rationalism. He believed that the most real things in life were ideas, propositions that can be known through pure reason. Deductive truths, which we talked about before, fall into this category, and mathematical truths do too. But by contrast, empiricism is based on the principle that the most reliable source of knowledge isn't our ideas or our reasoning, but our senses. Sure, we can know things through deduction and basic logic, but what actually leads us to truth, or at least gives us our best shot at getting there, are things like induction and the scientific method, ways of thinking that tell us about the material world. Probably the most famous split among philosophers between these two camps was the lifelong debate between Plato and Aristotle. Plato was convinced that truth resided in the immaterial world of ideas, while Aristotle's attention was focused firmly on the ground. But what about in Descartes' day? If he was the original prototype of the navel-gazing philosopher, a living example of rationalist thinking, then his foil was the 17th century English thinker John Locke. This is where he was born. Locke believed that we are all born as tabula rasa, or a blank slate. He argued that all knowledge is obtained through experience. He rejected the concept of innate ideas, the view that we're born preloaded with certain information, like what's good versus what's bad, or what is the nature of God. Locke thought that we are born knowing nothing, and instead all of our knowledge comes to us through sense data. But one place where Locke agreed with Descartes was in the idea that just because your senses tell you something, that doesn't mean you can trust it. After all, sometimes your senses give you false information.
What's up,
like when
Rishi?
you think you see or hear something that's just not there. Descartes' response to this, of course, was to just
they're
throw
not
out
consistent.
all
There is no
sense
schedule.
experience as an unreliable
Most likely there
source
won't
of
be that
knowledge.
many
But
because I'm
Locke
doing a
didn't
lot
go
of
that
traveling.
far. Instead, in order to figure out whether the
I just jumped on today because I had some free time.
World, he introduced a distinction between what he called the primary and secondary.
So I can't really tell you much more than that.
Primary qualities are qualities that physical
How's your
objects
summer going so
themselves
far?
have. They're not in our minds, Locke argued. They're actually in the stuff. These primary qualities include things like solidity, the density, weight, and mass of an object, and also extension, the height, depth, and width that a certain thing has. He also included figure, or the shape of an object, as well as mobility, which is this, whether it's stationary or in motion. So primary qualities, Locke said, belong to the thing itself. Take this apple. It weighs maybe 150 grams. It's the size of my palm, roundish but firm with the slightest bit of give, and right now it's moving through the air. Those are its primary qualities. But it has secondary qualities too, and by Locke's standards, they are not real, at least not in any objective, agreed-upon way. They're just in our minds, but they get there through the primary qualities. I'm talking about things like its color, taste, texture, smell, and sound. The secondary qualities of this apple are its redness, how it tastes and smells and feels on my tongue and hand, even how it sounds when I bite into it. Locke believed
I didn't know
that
you
the
played ping
distinction
pong,
between
Rishi.
primary
That's
and
cool. I like
secondary
ping pong.
qualities explained the disagreements that we all have about our perceptions of the outside world. Like, we could measure this apple in a bunch of different ways and all agree on its primary qualities, but its secondary qualities would no doubt lead to some disputes. Like, is it really red? What kind of red exactly? Cardinal red or carmine red? It's kind of dark purple at the top, or is it just like a dark pink? What about the sound it made? Would I call that crunchy or crispy? Or I don't like that bitey? It's like apple sound. We could argue about that kind of stuff till the cows came home. But if we disagree about its primary qualities, one of us is simply wrong, because primary qualities have nothing to do with you or me. Instead, they have everything to do with the object itself. Locke's reasoning was simple, even elegant, extracting a lot of explanatory power out of very few basic concepts. As a result, it resonated with a lot of people, and one person it resonated strongly with was the Irish philosopher George Berkeley. He was moved by Locke's empiricism and took it seriously, so seriously in fact that he ended up using Locke's own logic against him. He basically took empiricism to its logical conclusion, dismantling the whole process of perception to the point that he had to wonder whether anything existed at all. Berkeley began by taking apart the distinction that Locke made between primary and secondary qualities. Like, think about this apple again. How do you know its shape? Locke said the apple's shape as a primary quality is immediately perceivable. But Berkeley pointed out that you don't perceive some qualities of an object while totally disregarding others. Like, you can't detect an apple's shape without first, or at least also, detecting its color. When you think about it, you can't detect any of the primary qualities without also considering the secondary ones. You can't see a colorless apple. You can't feel a textureless apple. In fact, if you try to strip away the apple's secondary qualities in an effort to get at the primary ones, you end up with no apple at all. Try it. Close your eyes and imagine an apple made of only primary qualities. So it has a certain shape, a certain size, but it doesn't have any color or texture or taste. You can't do it. You try to imagine it with no color, but really you're probably imagining one that's either black or white or transparent, the color of what's behind it. And if you try to imagine it as having no texture, you'll find that there's still texture there. It's just smooth. Remember, Locke asserted that secondary qualities are not objectively real. They can only be subjectively perceived. But now, Berkeley has shown that the two are inextricably linked. You can't have one without the other, which means that the primary qualities can't be real either. They too are just what your mind makes of things. So this led Berkeley to a startling conclusion. There's just no such thing as matter. There can't be. Instead, there's only perceptions. Berkeley's famous assertion, his version of cogito ergo sum, was esse est percipi. To be is to be perceived. In his opinion, there are no objects, only perceivers. And even then, the perceivers themselves don't really have any physical form. They're just disembodied minds, perceiving things that aren't really there. A little bit terrifying when you start thinking about it. In Berkeley's scenario, we're all set adrift in a world of nothing but thought. What's scary about this is that if everything's just perception, then when the perception goes away, there can't be anything left. So, like, please, for the love of Pete, do not turn away from your computer. If you stop perceiving me, I stop existing. But what if maybe you don't care about me? Still, you'd better not go to sleep, because as soon as you do, you'll cease to exist, because you won't be able to perceive yourself. The only guarantee that you'll continue to exist in your sleep is to have a friend watch you when you're sleeping, which probably is a non-starter for a number of reasons. But in any case, the second your friend blinks, you're gone. So in the end, Berkeley believed that there was only one thing that kept us and everything else from disappearing into oblivion: God. Berkeley believed that God was the ultimate.
It's always God at the end of the day, seems like.
Yeah. Oh,
You have a
just
question
as
which
a
is sort of
tangent, I feel like these.
So, one sec.
I don't. Yeah, that's no problem.
Rishi, so for letters of rec, you request the letter from the teacher, and then there's a piece of software called Naviance that you select the colleges that you would like the letter to be sent to, and then the teacher will upload the letter to Naviance, to the software, and then send it off to those colleges that you pre-selected for it to go to. That's pretty much the way it works. Go ahead, Adarsh.
Yeah, I just want to say that for both the rationalist point of view, which was Descartes, and the empirical point of view, the introduction of God is necessary to recover the remainder of sort of knowledge. I think that's that's logically sound. The sort of debate is not over either of Berkeley's or Descartes' logic, rather its premises. So it's a matter of accepting the premises that come before he introduces God, whether or not you need a God to sort of recover, the world as we know it. But the fact that I think it's very clear here that it actually would, according to the principles of sort of empiricism, it's sort of been outlined that nothing can really exist without it being perceived. Therefore, if you continue to exist, you must have been perceived while you are not perceiving, and if no one else is perceiving, there must be a global perceiver. I think that's a logically sound thing. It's just a matter of whether you buy empiricism as a whole. But that's just my 2 cents. We can continue if you want.
I'm just trying to think. I feel like there's a lot here. I'm just trying to think about a little bit. So it's kind of like this idea of the perceiver and a perceived is like object, subject, object kind of thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think you can let's finish this because it's like 30 more seconds, and then we can take a pause and think, discuss some extra stuff.
Ultimate perceiver. God is always watching with unblinking perception that holds objects in existence even when we're not paying attention. The tough thing about Berkeley is, we all pretty much think he has to be wrong. Very few of us are willing to give up our belief in the physical world, no matter who's watching. We are sensory animals. We really need this apple to exist. Next time, we're gonna take a side journey into the world of knowledge, and then in episode 8, we'll see if Karl Popper can manage to get the physical world back for us. Today, we have learned about empiricism as a response to skepticism. We talked about John Locke and his distinction between primary and secondary qualities, and we've seen why George Berkeley thinks that distinction ultimately falls apart, leaving us with literally nothing but our minds, ideas, and perceptions. This episode of Crash Course Philosophy is made possible by Squarespace. Squarespace is a way to create a website, blog, or online.
Can you ask a senior teacher for letter of rec? Yeah. Well, the only problem with that, Rishi, is you'll usually need the letter by like November or so you won't really have had a lot of time to the teachers won't really have a lot of time to get to know you. So letters from senior teachers are always going to be a little bit less informed because they haven't known you as long than other teachers who you've maybe have spent an entire year with. That's the difficulty of senior teachers. But you never know. It's possible. Just depends on the relationship, I suppose. Okay, so...
Alright.
Man, I feel like my brain is all over the place with this stuff.
Yeah.
I think there's like the idea of like a perceiver and a perceived. I don't know if I'm necessarily on board with that as like a fundamental axiom that there has to that there are these subjects and objects.
Conclusion of essentially the sort of Locke's empiricism is that there are primary and secondary qualities, right? But what Berkeley says is logically that you cannot separate something primary qualities. Like, you as a person cannot observe an apple and establish your own model of its primary qualities without also necessarily using the secondary qualities, right? That was sort of, imagine an apple without color. Well, you can't. So you can't determine its actual shape, which is supposedly a primary quality, without looking at its secondary qualities that are subjective qualities.
Well, the idea of like you can't imagine an apple without color is because color is such an ingrained sensory perception that we have as humans, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. That's the point.
But couldn't you imagine an apple like from a mathematical perspective, like as purely a mathematical abstraction?
So what you're doing is you're assuming a rationalist point of view, right? Like, yes, I agree with you that you can, but like you have to understand like what context you're speaking in. From the empiricist point of view, you can't. There's no such thing.
There's no such thing as a mathematical apple.
Right. There's just what you look at. Right. Like the whole distinction. Rationalism is that there are these ideas, ideas, the most general thing. Mathematics is like a subtype of idea. But ideas are the most fundamentally real thing, and empiricism is that your sensory experience is the most real thing, in a sense.
Okay.
To use figure of speech, in a sense, that's the most. So
you're not sensing math.
Yeah, exactly. Your five senses, like your physical, material observations of the world, right? You observe the apple with your material senses, and what Locke said is you have to establish what are the primary qualities and the secondary qualities. But then Berkeley says, actually, you can't do that. So if you truly hold empiricism, I think Berkeley actually did believe that, which is if you truly hold empiricism, that then you can't have you can't have a notion of reality without something the Latin thing, esse est percepi, meaning something cannot exist without it being perceived. If you take the axiom of the premises of empiricism Something cannot exist without it being perceived.
You know.
In
What's
a
up,
true
T-Chill?
sense, in a fundamental sense. So when you're saying, well, I can just, I can physically, right, in both using a combination of mathematics and maybe biological and chemical processes, describe the apple without ever making a direct reference or specification in my mind to the color. It's like, yes, but that ability to do that assumes a rationalist framework, which is, the previous video, Descartes. So what do you think?
I'm probably more rationalist. Well, like I think I'm pretty. I feel like my intuition tells me that I don't know if that there's really anything. I feel like I'm so limited by my brain, by the way that I am as just an organism and an individual, that I can't make any claims really about anything. I'm kind of a nihilist to an extent in that regard. To the extent that I just don't think I think I'm so limited in my scope of experience that I don't really have confidence that I can say a lot about anything outside of the I think therefore I am kind of idea.
I see.
So
I think therefore I am is still skepticism, but saying that I can't make any further claims means you're an empiricist. That at least that claim means you're claiming to be an empiricist. Because the idea of empiricism is you can't make these sort of truthful claims directly, right? All you can do is rely on what you, as you are epistemologically, what you experience through the world through your senses.
Yeah,
but then you have to take all of the things that Berkeley said to be true. I think those are logically sound, given the premise of that. So there is nothing exists unless it's being perceived, because epistemologically,
I think it
you,
exists.
a limited being, can only perceive.
I think it could exist or it could not exist. It's hard to say anything strongly about it.
Yeah. What I'm saying is, if you think that you are at most only able to perceive or to understand rather through your own perceptions, in that sense, that's sort of the equivalent to the thing you said about being a limited, you're limited in your ability to know absolute truths and make statements like that. That's an equivalent statement of saying, at most I can only perceive the world. Now, if that's epistemologically true for you, that at most you are a being who can perceive the world, then the world, there's nothing more real than just something being perceived.
Right, to me.
That's what that means. If you are a being who says that, you are a being who can only, at most, just perceive the world materially.
Right, so are you saying that I can't say those two things simultaneously?
I'm saying you can't say my phone exists while I'm sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
Well, unless you suppose the sort of perception God thing, which is also another argument. But, for example, sort of excluding a global perceiver, right? You cannot believe that something is existing without someone else watching it and being consciously aware of it. Because everyone, both rationalists and empiricists, they take cogito ergo sum, right? So there's always a necessity for a consciousness to be a being's own certainty in some things have to stem from the first principle of that being is self-conscious. But without that self-consciousness acting on an object, that object does not exist for an empiricist. So you cannot believe that you are fundamentally limited to your senses and also believe that certain objects continue to exist. Without, and the caveat there is that the logical necessity to continue holding those two beliefs is that there's a global perceiver.
Okay, so you're saying, hold on, I just can make this clear. So if I'm saying that,
I think that before
so-
you try to describe it, it's best to say, I'm saying a bunch of if, then this. Right. So just think about it that way, right?
Like I'm trying to, I don't know if, I feel like what I, by the way, T-Chili, that's pretty, I got a 3070 Ti. How'd you get a hold of one of those? Those are like, are those back in stock nowadays? I haven't been looking.
I think I saw one for 600 the other day.
Oh wow, that's pretty good actually.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so just to kind of ground it, like I think of, like, if I have no reason to doubt that my phone exists when I'm sleeping. Right? Like, because of all the evidence that I have that it's there when I put it there and it's there when I wake up. And it seems to me the simplest explanation would be that it was there the whole time. Or else I'd have to, there's a lot of other stuff I'm going to have to, like, start thinking about. If it truly isn't there, then to me, it just feels like that's a lot of extra stuff now that I have to explain for how does it just, like, blink in and out. But I was more talking about, like, fundamentally, like, my perception of the phone. I'm saying that, like, the only reason why it's a phone is because it's sort of constructed as a phone to me, but, like, it's possible that other perspectives or other ways of looking at that same thing would reveal, like, a lot of different, like, very different stuff about it. Like, it could be perceived in a lot of different ways, which would give different meanings to it.
Right. But I would say empiricism solves that problem, like, internally, because you can't really suppose
Which problem?
other
I don't see a problem
experience
that needs to be
like,
solved.
Well, you're saying that another person's experience, another being's experience, would experience the phone differently as not a phone, right? But
Right,
that's a claim that you're making, but that claim is not possible to be true. You can't possibly be true for an empiricist. Because for an empiricist, all that you can be certain of is material observations and senses. You can't sense someone else's experience, so there really is no such thing as the external experience to my own local experience.
There is no external experience to my own because I can't sense it. Therefore, it can't exist.
I can't. Right. I'm experiencing the phone in my hand.
That doesn't seem reasonable. Like,
Well,
that seems very, like...
I'm not an empiricist, but I'm saying an empiricist is forced to believe such things. That there really is no other experience of the phone that I can be sure of other than my experience of the phone as a phone in the way I think of a phone as a phone.
Right, but you can't simultaneously just therefore also assume that there's other ways to perceive that phone. There's other possible ways to do that aside from my own.
I don't think so, because you have no evidence for that as an empiricist.
Oh, I see. So I can't.
An empiricist can't suggest these sort of weird, like, other, like, means of perception, right? Because it's sort of tied to the secondary qualia. Like, the secondary qualities is the sort of subjective difference in interpretation of what is there, right? And Berkeley's point was that actually everything is sort of like there is no sort of thing as it is primary phone, right? Right? I can't experience the phone without experiencing it through a bunch of secondary things. So really, there is no sort of phone as such that I'm able to grasp. That's the sort of Berkeley's countering Locke thing, that empiricism really means that nothing can exist except just the perception of it. Right? From this idea that if I see the phone and my friend sees the phone, we could see it differently. It's like, yeah, so what Locke is saying, we can still be empiricists because it's fine, because then we can say there are some things that we will share and there are some things we'll subjectively, our experiences will differ. We'll call it primary and secondary. But Berkeley says, actually, you can't really establish primary without necessarily relying on all the secondary stuff, which is all the subjective stuff. So because of that, because there is subjective difference intrinsic to every single person's perception, then that logically entails existence as a thing has to be identical to just be something being perceived.
For
there's
me,
nothing
yeah.
more than
For
just-
you as the perceiver, yes.
Yeah, well, in general, you can't hold the notion of existence there's a very big difference between all I can say about my reality as I experience it is just what I perceive. That's a different claim than what empiricism. Empiricism is saying, like, literally everything that exists is just what is being perceived. Period. By anyone. So the sum of all things that are being perceived are the things that exist. Like, in a literal sense of existence.
I don't know. I wonder if I just don't have I don't know if my intuitions are working right now on this idea.
See, I don't agree with the idea, but that's because I take issue with the premise that I am more of a rationalist. I don't say I'm only a rationalist, I'm only empiricist. I think all human beings are fundamentally both. I think that's what the subject of that conversation I mentioned with Peterson and Dawkins is, that Peterson saying, well, clearly empiricism is useful. That's what science is based on. But rationalism is also useful, and we clearly rely on both every day. So there's some way to reconcile those. That's like needs to be thought out by a bunch of philosophers. But I think the source of trouble you're having is like a one that I also sort of have, is that empiricism as a whole cannot be true.
Yeah, I think the part where it falls apart for me is this idea that, like, if you the idea that you have to therefore bite the bullet of, therefore if something is not being perceived, it doesn't exist.
Right.
Because
that notion's not like a mechanistic claim. It's not like the act of perception is bringing it into being. Rather, the way you arrive to that claim is that at some level, at a fundamental level, when you think about it, like, the only way you can establish existence is by it being perceived.
To actually know that it exists?
Yeah. So, in fact, it's like in every case in which something exists, it has to be perceived, and in no case if something not exist can it be. It's like sort of every single thing. If you go line item, right, with everything in the universe, right, or whatever world, right, existence. If you're an empiricist, existence and perception match 1-to-1 in terms of when it does exist and when it doesn't exist, and when it is perceived and when it's not perceived. So that's the claim, and because of that, then it has to be the exact same thing. Because there's no underlying factor. It's sort of like there's a 1-to-1 exact correlation with perception and existence, and it's impossible for there to be any sort of confounding variable underlying that. That's what empiricism shows. So therefore, perception is the same thing as existence.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. Teachel, did you take philosophy or something? In college, probably. I think, does everyone have to take a philosophy class in college? Is that a required course? Or can you get away with not taking one?
I mean, I technically have to take a philosophy and values class, but the engineering college doesn't. I don't think, in Berkeley at least.
Okay.
I'm not in the engineering college, but I would say, yeah, most schools probably have that requirement in some form or another. But there are probably some random class that really doesn't do actual philosophy and it just satisfies the rec. I mean, there are those at Berkeley too, right?
Yeah, it probably would fall under a certain category of class that it could satisfy, but there's probably a bunch of other classes that also satisfy that category.
Yeah, in principle there is a philosophy requirement, but it doesn't necessarily mean everyone takes philosophy 101, right?
Yeah.
So here's the other thing though. So flip side, so symmetrically, in the rationalist frame of view, you can only. So the problem of empiricism: how can things continue to exist without my perception? So then you have to posit an external, omnipresent observer.
Okay. Yes,
The
I understand
minimal
that. Yeah.
level of objection, right? Similarly, in rationalism, it's like, okay, how do I establish other things exist, right, without just my own existence? And then in his very, I think he goes into the argument later in the series, but it's in a very similar sort of way. I need some omnipresent. I need some things with the minimal number of qualities that's an omnipresent,
Okay, I
intelligent, and good being in order to recover everything. So they sort of have similar analogous problems, rationalism and empiricism, and they're both solved necessarily by this being that exists. So either way, you get that. That's my personal motivation for believing in such a thing, just personally. But
So why do both of these lines of thought feel so compelled to actually have to rebuild? Like because it's so like why not just stop at I think therefore I am? Why not just stop there? Why try and then go like, well, now I have to actually explain everything else?
It's logically necessary if you've already established I think therefore I am, then what you do in the world you can't be certain of it. Like,
No,
for
yeah.
example, it
Why-
has very practical implications. Like, is my spouse telling me the truth about something that's a very practical and relevant to my life? It's fundamentally grounded in that same, like, that question, and the way you would think about that answer is the same as Descartes' rationalist sort of thing. Well, how can I know for certain? So if you buy that, knowing what, your family is telling you, and if that's like a good thing to know, if you have that value, then you have to equally value the full pursuit and reconstruction of all knowledge, because it's the same value. Does that make sense?
Not really. Sorry.
Okay, maybe I think I used really bad words.
So yeah, I'm asking basically why can't we just be satisfied with like I think therefore I am, like all I can really be 100% confident of is that, and then I'm just gonna I'm gonna act in the world, and like I'm gonna just assume, like I can just assume like all of this. I can't really know whether this is all true or not, but like it seems to be, and like I don't need like I don't have perfect proof, but I can just sort of be okay with the fact that like I can't know, so I'll just go with the flow.
Yeah, I'll make two claims. I'll make 2 points here, not claims. One, the question you're asking is an ethical question, sort of value, right? Why do I value the reconstruction? Why don't I just value my lack of confidence, I guess. Right?
Sure,
So that's the sort of question. Secondly, you can assume, but truth, then if you don't want to undergo the whole long project of reconstructing everything, you can make a very short claim that someone else can undergo the logical sort of reconstruction and then establish a bunch of logical facts. And if you assume that you can go beyond cogito ergo sum, right, then you can assume the results of whatever the logical reconstruction will be, right, whatever they are, you'll just assume that, but you're just going to assume you move on. So the point of the logical reconstruction is to show that what it is, you are assuming, in the sense that, I can eat the banana. I don't need to know what it's made of. But the point of the biologist is saying, what I say the banana is made of isn't going to change how you treat that banana, really. In this like scenario, for example, right? So the equivalent here is that you can go on living your world with these assumptions, but the rationalist shows that you have to posit a creator in order for you to continue going on. Like, your assumption is you assuming a creator. You can just go on making the assumption, and then if you wanted to understand what it is you're assuming, that would be a thing you're assuming.
One second,
So
let me see what Willy Wonka's talking.
It's colleges I'm applying to.
Yeah, colleges I'm
Not
applying
the
to.
outside,
Yeah. Yeah, the ones that you're thinking about, I don't think I ever even see those. Those are, I think, just for you to like keep as a list, maybe for your own organization. I don't know. I'm not sure what it looks like on a student side, so.
It's just an organizational list tool. You put them all in thinking about, and eventually you transfer it to the applying to. When you have your final list. Does that analogy make sense? Do you think between like, I'm a biologist, I'm explaining to you what the fruit is made of. You can just go on assuming that there's something in the fruit, and it's made in some way. I don't need to know that. Similar, the rationalist is saying, well, you know, there are going to be some assumptions you make. You can make those assumptions, but there is a list of things that you're assuming to be true. And the rationalist shows one of those things you assume to be true is that there has to be some omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent, omnibenevolent creator at the minimum, in order for you to validly assume, if that makes sense.
Sure. I mean, like, I assume that, like, we're having an actual conversation right now, right?
Right.
And, well, I mean, I assume that that there's actually a person like on the other end of this, right? That's an assumption.
Right.
And I'm just using the evidence that I'm getting feedback, right? I'm perceiving things, but again, the perception issue isn't, it could be wrong. Like, I could be misperceiving things, or it could be
an
all
AI
sorts of
bot
things.
created
Yeah.
by a government, right? Okay, that's.
But it's fine. I'm kind of the opinion that it's fine to assume but also kind of in the very back of your mind, kind of recognizing the fact that you are assuming, and not making the next step of saying that therefore it's reality.
I agree and disagree, because I agree with like half of what you said. I think it's a fine ethical claim to like go say, hey, I'm just gonna assume, right? But
yeah, because if I didn't, I would. If like, then you're paralyzed. Like, you actually can't do anything.
However, I think, right. In this context, though, like, this is one of the rare contexts when I can very specifically define the word truth. In this context, where if you're just going to go ahead and assume, because you know you like you said, you'd be paralyzed. That is a sort of good way of judging, or what you mean by ultimately true is sort of what you decide to go with.
Oh, I see. That's a different meaning of truth, then.
Yeah. I'll have to explain it in a way that like makes sense. So
This
you
is, I think-
deciding to go ahead to assume, that is indicative of what you choose to believe is true. It's not just an assumption that you can divorce from your notion of truth. In that sense, it has to be something that you believe to be true. You can't assume. In other words, you can't assume something without believing that thing to be true. Like, that's the same act.
I see. Okay. Is it though? I mean,
Yeah, I think so. If you assume something to be true, it means you believe that thing to be true. For it, as long as it's not like a scenario when you're like containerizing and saying, okay, for the sake of assumption, and then you're doing like an experiment. We're not talking about that. We're talking about, I mean, if you think of it a container experiment, it's like sort of the most outward, all-encompassing experiment. What do I do at the end of the day? That's the box I'm thinking about. And in that box, if I make an assumption, then that is what you believe.
So let me just put this back to you. So you would say then that if the only way that a person who really truly only believes that the truth is I think therefore I am would be a paralyzed person who literally can't do anything at all because they're not making any assumptions. That person, then you would say, is acting out truth. And then if I were to do anything else, I've added in that assumption is truth.
More or less, yeah. So the guy who's completely paralyzed, I would say the best way to describe it, he is acting according to his own principles in that sense, right? His principles are, the only principle that exists is I think therefore I am, and then, I'm not doing anything. He's sort of being honest about the fact that he can't do anything with.
Okay, so you think I'm
just
being
that person.
dishonest when I'm like, I can't really be sure of anything, but I'm going to do this anyway. You're saying, well, no, you're actually lying to yourself because you actually do. If you really believed that, you wouldn't do anything about it.
No, I don't think you're being dishonest. I think there's a form of that can.
Mhm.
That's a very similar thing, but there's a difference between being sure and believing. So when you say,
Is this where you get
I
like the
can't
idea
be
of
sure-
faith a little bit? This is where faith kind comes into the picture.
I say faith is sort of this extension of this of this sort of metaphysical to also morals. Like this plus morals plus epistemology together is what you would call faith. So it's a similar idea. But yeah, basically like you're being honest about the fact that you're not sure, and so you make an assumption. That's not dishonest, but you still believe it without imperfect knowledge. You still believe it to be like the case that
So
these things are true.
do you think there's a difference between a person who acts something out is there a difference between these two people, right? Person A, they do something and they believe it 100% to be true. They think it's actual reality. It's not an assumption at all. I think this is 100% true, and I think this is the reality of like perfect reality. And then there's a person who does the same action, but they're like, I'm not 100% sure that this is actually the truth. I'm just assuming it is. Is there a difference between those two people to you?
Yeah. I can't describe the difference without one more detail, a piece of information about person A, because when you say he believes it really, let's say, for example, do you believe more? I think the easiest way to say it from a rationalist point of view, to take an example, do you believe more than I think, therefore I am, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So in that case, person A is believing more, and he's 100% sure of it. That's not a dishonest thing. I think therefore this person, you know, in a simple way, you could say, oh, this person believes in God with 100% thing. Now, person B isn't sure, but surety is not a matter of belief. It's very much related and can affect belief. But if he still goes ahead and goes anyways, he still fundamentally believes it. He's just not as confident in it. Now, if the distinction between this person and person A is that person A is somehow confident in the creator, that would be contingent on, does he have some ground-shattering, logical argument or some amazing empirical scientific experiment that he's shown God to exist. If he doesn't, then I think he's actually false. I would say the person who has 100% belief in God's existence without faith, who also doesn't have a ground-shattering argument or ground-shattering scientific experiment, is being dishonest. Because I think person B, who believes in God on faith, is being more honest because he actually doesn't have any direct sort of evidence of it, but he's forced to assume God exists if he wants to be more than a paralyzed person. Does that make sense?
Okay, so
I
yeah,
do think there's a difference.
So
But
I can imagine
person B.
I can imagine. Let me try to think. If we want to just use God as an example, as like a placeholder example.
Right. Yeah, please.
I can kind of imagine like maybe four approaches. You have the person who believes 100% that it's actual exists. It's not an assumption. It's a full belief. It's reality. It's truth. There's the person that believes, but they're like, I'm not sure, but I'm going to assume. And then there's the person that's like, I don't believe. I can't be sure, but I don't believe. And then there's the like, I don't believe, and I believe that's 100% reality. Of those four people, the two in the middle are the ones that are being the most honest to you?
Let me think about the.
Do you know what I'm trying to get at?
The correct one. Yeah. No, I actually did also think that there's a sort of table, like a 2x2 table. Like, yeah, there are four things. I know what you're getting at. So, I'll go one by one. So the first person, right? So you're saying they have 100% belief, and they have no lack of confidence in their belief, right? So I think this is essentially.
It's like the devout,
like a 2x2. Like the columns are belief versus not belief, and the rows are like ultimate or total confidence versus partial confidence, right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, so using the language of belief and confidence, I think anyone who acts and doesn't believe is being dishonest.
Who acts and doesn't believe is being dishonest.
Right.
Anyone who acts and doesn't believe is being dishonest.
Right. I can say
That's-
more
that-
about the other
That'd be
people.
the middle two then. That'd be the person who
that-
believes in God but is not sure, and the person who doesn't believe in God but is also not sure. Like, because they're acting. Like everyone is acting in this case. Everyone's making some action. Like, and when I say
Right,
action, I mean
yeah,
some.
we assume everyone's acting, right?
Yeah. Right.
If
So two people
we
are
assume
acting.
Everyone's acting.
Two people are acting in
Well, no,
100%
because
confidence,
they're-
and then two people are acting in confidence.
Right, but the people who act, confidence doesn't determine the honesty if you assume that there's action. Like, I can, we can phrase this in a different way and say we don't assume action, we assume everyone's being true to their beliefs, in that sort of they're abiding logically by their beliefs. And then I would make a different claim that's sort of saying the same thing. But, for example, in the way I said it before, if we assume everyone is acting and living out their life, right? And the people who don't believe in God are being dishonest in that scenario, because they have no logical way to continue from cogito ergo sum to I can make this assumption. Now there are two honest positions, is that I'm not sure if God exists or not. But if I want to A, be logically consistent, and B, continue living out my life, I have to posit some creator that puts my confidence for me. And then there's the other person who's just, I'm already totally confident that there is this God, and somehow he has this weird knowledge that he's somehow God. Does that make sense?
Okay, hold on a second. So you think so? I feel like you're conflating. I feel like God is not a good example here to get at what I'm trying to get at. Because I feel like
I'm just using God as the placeholder.
Can
Like,
we
the thing
use
beyond-
something else? Because I feel like
Yeah.
God is too big of a thing. It's like too like. What if we just used like, okay, like there's a let's do something way simpler. Like, let's say there's 4 people and there's like a glass of water on the table in front of them, right? You could imagine. Well, that's actually not going to make it. That's actually not going to work because they would all agree that the glass is probably there. Okay, let's scale this back.
That'd be equivalent to acting, right? If agreeing the glass is there would be equivalent to like action.
Right, and like it doesn't make any sense for a person to say no, the glass is not there. That's kind of a weird.
Right.
Like,
That
I'm
would be
trying
the nihilist point of view.
Yeah, it's
sense.
not there, but yet I can still reach out and interact with it. That's like
Yeah.
a really strange way to be. So I could imagine that there are 2 people. One who's like, the glass is definitely there, and I'm gonna grab it, and like I know it's there for sure, and I have no doubts at all, and that's just the truth of
Right.
the reality of the universe. And then the other person's like, I can't know for sure that it's there. I can't know that I'm actually interacting with it, but I'm gonna just assume because I have
Right,
to.
so they
right?
believe it's there, right?
They both believe it's
but they
there.
haven't
One,
nec-
it's
one
confidence
is not
levels.
necessarily confident.
Yeah.
So there is, I guess you have to think about like confidence by proxy. So this person A, who's like 100% and everything, right? They're just confident directly. Person B is in a sense confident in 100%, but not in like the same way. He's confident because he's assumed that there is something that gives him the 100% confidence to act. If you want to talk in this language of are they acting sort of honestly to their principles, well, if you define that as acting with 100%, you'd only make an action when you know it to be certain, right? You only, right? So then that means 100% confidence. So then this sort of not being confident is sort of we're implicitly saying they make up that confidence by assuming there is something that gives them the necessary confidence. Does that make sense?
Well, you can do something without being 100% confident, right? Or are
Yeah,
you
yeah,
are
that's
you
what
saying
I'm
that
saying.
it's not possible?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's not possible if we want to get into the weeds, but what we mean when we say I'm not confident but I'm gonna do it anyway, is that you're assuming that it's true. just in any simple situation, right? If you have like 70% confidence, you're just assuming it is 100% true, right? Confidence is just a proxy for probability of truth. Truth is still going to be a binary in terms of is the glass on the table right there in front of you or not. So by assuming 100% truth with a 70% confidence, you're sort of filling up that 70 to 100 gap implicitly by saying, okay, well, probably it's going to be this one. Now, if you take that to the epistemological limit, meaning like, now, how can I be sure of just the things in front of me, right? Then you're actually literally boosting your confidence in a claim. You're not just boosting the truth. You're not just taking the truth. The equivalent of taking the glass to be there being true when in terms of can I make claims about things is just saying, okay, there has to be something. I'm just going to assume it without knowing with logical certainty, but I'm just going to assume that there is something which logically allows me to say with 100% confidence that everything I experience is real. Do you understand what I'm trying to say here?
I think so.
It's a lot of, like you're assuming that there is something that if you logically knew that something, you could say with 100% confidence that my experience is real. Or, sorry, beyond the cogito ergo sum, that the world around me, there's a reality, so on and so forth. So that is the assumption. Now, a lot of people say that in itself, that assumption is in itself a logical thing. This is going like another step beyond that. Now, the fact that you have to assume something necessarily is in itself a logical claim for something's existence. If that makes sense.
The fact that you have to assume something,
like if you take the outside world as reality, then the assumptions in itself, the things you have to assume, are logically true. Because it's an axiom of yours that you need to be able to move around in your world, right? You can't be paralyzed.
Yeah, I mean, I do things on a daily basis, right? Like I interact with other people, I eat food, I do everything that I do because to not would be insane, right? It would be just like, it would be essentially, you just might as well kill yourself, right? You might as well just not exist at all.
Informing your act, so that's good. That's a good way of, was it abduction? I think abduction or induction, whatever, one of them, to say, okay, so using this sort of understanding of, people, we take axiom 2, which is we need to act, and then we also take axiom 1, I think, therefore I am. If we hold these two axioms, then logically we need to hold the things that will allow us to be 100% confident in the existence of reality. Because we're holding the fact that we need to act, which means we need to believe in the reality. It's almost an identical saying there, just a matter of emphasis. And we also hold, I think, therefore I am. So to go beyond, I think, therefore I am in my certainty, I need to hold a set of logical assumptions. And then Descartes in the book goes into an argument for why God exists. But then that's a separate argument. Given God exists, that is the sort of minimal limit of what you need to sort of go forth logically true.
Yeah, I guess I'd be curious to see what how Descartes went from that to that, what his argument was. Do you know what that is? Is there is there something I could look up, like Descartes' argument for God or something like that?
Well, that'd be a different thing. The sort of, I think I mentioned it earlier. I think the fact that I need, like Descartes was saying, okay, here's a sort of external tangential argument for the existence of God, and then Hank sort of mentioned it wasn't that good of an argument. But I think personally, and I think this is a logically defensible claim, that the fact that it's required, that the God is required for the establishment of beyond my own perception, is in itself a logical argument. Because I'm not just wanting to act in the world, I hold that as an axiom. So that sort of firmly cements everything that's required to act in the world as logically true. So Descartes gave a third, like, you know, an external argument for God's existence. I don't remember what that one was specifically, but this idea that you need a God, and the God being defined as omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, and omnibenevolent. Those are, you need a being who has those 4 qualities. That's the minimal necessary amount you need to say, okay, if I want my assumptions to be true, this has to exist.
One second. Do you know the answer to Rishi's question, or Willy Wonka's question? He's asking about, like, how does he move stuff from one place to another in Naviance?
I don't remember.
If
There's
you
like a
remember.
button in Naviance.
I can't imagine it's that hard. It's got to be an easy button somewhere, right? To do
I
something
think
like that.
you select it and then you go to the top and there's like a transfer. Like you have to check the check marks, the checkbox. You should ask one of his peers who's also doing it. One of his peers will know.
Yeah. I'm just trying to get myself... I wanted to read that little document I opened up. I just have to get
Yeah, I saw it on your stream.
back to my base so I don't die. This game is actually kind of really annoying. I don't like the fact that you can't be out for like half of the game. You just burn to death.
It's an interesting mechanic.
I'm also just probably not playing it right. I don't know. This game seems really hard right now. I can't. I'm trying to kill this one thing and I can't. I've been spending like the last 2
Maybe
hours.
it's one of those games where like you level up and eventually you just get this really OP of like umbrella sort of thing.
I don't know, but
In a
I have
game
to...
where this really hard, challenging feature becomes like not that challenging later in the
Maybe.
game.
The problem is I have to kill this thing to get a, in order to get my next level gear, I have to kill this person to get the, like this person that I kill gives me the ability to create leather, and leather is required for the next level of gear, so it's, I feel like I'm just kind of stuck. But I probably am not doing something right.
Just to comment, I think a lot of the struggles I'm having with words right now and phrasing is just because I have it very well thought out in my mind, but I actually don't think I think in words directly, and it's not like words or pictures. Do you think in words or pictures? I think I sort of think in words, but it's just sort of like meta abstract words, so I don't know the words I'm thinking of.
No,
But
I
sort
don't
of,
just...
If I were to like think about my thoughts, I would say, okay, I probably was thinking using this word, but what it meant, like when I say to be true or to be sure or to believe, like I'll probably use it like 3 times right back to back, and they all mean different things, and I don't realize it. So then when I go to say it, I'm like, oh wait, that doesn't even make sense. You know what I mean?
Maybe, yeah. No, I don't. I think language is not like it's very difficult to convey what you're thinking.
Yeah.
Language is not the perfect tool for that, unfortunately.
Let's see if I sit down and think right now. What's like a very... Is there a better way of saying what I'm trying to say?
Um,
I'm sort of thinking it as like a story. Like, let's say I'm like just a dude who wants to go on living my life. Right? Like, I don't necessarily need to logically prove, personally, right? I don't need to be Rene Descartes and do all my, years and years of logical proofs, right? I can just assume, okay, my reality does exist, right? I can go on and act in it, cool. So I can make that assumption. All Descartes is saying is that by making that assumption, that is a logically equivalent thing of assuming a list of logical claims. One of those claims, he says, is that at minimum you need a 4-quality, being, which is essentially a creator god.
So basically, you're saying like the Descartes' whole thing was, like most people just live their life with assuming. I'm gonna actually like go back and I'm gonna like lay out the like what that assumption
it is they're
means.
assuming.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. That assumption means these things.
Yeah. Okay.
Empiricism, sort of, to tie it back, empiricism was, or at least Berkeley was sort of doing the same thing. That I need to. I hold, I think therefore I am, and I need to recover my reality. And if you take the empirical sort of frame of view instead of the rationalism, then you have to, posit a global perceiver, right, in order to take my axiom that I want to do as just a dude who wants to live my life, which is that my life is real. So holding that axiom, I have to posit a global perceiver, being an empiricist. So I think that in itself is a fine argument for God's existence. I think the ones that he gives in his meditations, Descartes is like a third, in itself, what's an argument for God? The ontological argument, something. This is in addition, I think.
I'm thinking, is this the first one? Is this kind of the one that's more closely related to stemming from, I think,
maximize this so I can read it. There is at least as much reality in the efficient and total cause as in the effect of that cause. Something cannot arise from nothing. Agreed. What is more perfect cannot arise from what is less perfect. Okay, so let's see. Definition. The nature of an idea is such that, of itself, it requires no formal reality except what it derives from my thought. Okay, I think I know what that means. I'm not sure. Objective mode of being belongs to ideas by their nature. Formal mode of being belongs to the causes of ideas. Okay, so objectivity is inherent to ideas by the nature of an idea. And formal mode of being belongs to the cause of ideas. So I guess logical structure is implicit with the creation of ideas. So you're saying, basically, I think definition 2 is giving that ideas are objective and logic exists. And then definition of God is a subsistence that is infinite, independent, omniscient, omnipotent. I think the ... God has to be good in order to him. I think it was touched in the video. In order for a given idea to contain... Well, omnipotent, I think
that's powerful, yeah. Omniscient.
Yeah, omnibenevolent is
omnibenevolent,
yeah, it has a moral, it's doing good things, right?
Yeah.
In order for a given idea to contain such and such objective reality, it must surely derive it from some cause. Wait, let me... Okay. Alright, I forgot the prose of, old people. It's just... nested clauses. Okay, for a given idea to contain such and such objective reality, it must surely derive it from some cause which contains at least as much formal reality as there is objective reality in the idea. Okay.
It's very hard to parse.
So, formal mode of being is defining formal mode to being belongs to the causes of ideas. Okay, there must in that much formal reality as there is objective reality in the idea. Okay. I think that means something to do with the logical truth of the thing that precedes the idea it's essentially, I think, this might be wrong, but I think this means at least as much as saying the amount of logical validity is going to be equivalent to the objective reality of the idea, if that makes sense. That if I am saying a logically true statement, then my idea about that statement there's an idea about that statement, right? And the formal reality, or in other words, the logical validity of that logical statement is equivalent to the objective reality of my idea about that statement. Does that make sense?
Not at all.
So basically, I make a statement, and that's just a logically true statement. Or, well, it just exists as a statement. It doesn't have to be true yet. It's just there is a statement. It makes a claim. And then there's also my idea about that claim. And that one is saying that, number one is saying that the logical validity of that claim is equivalent to the objectiveness of my idea about it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that really follows for me. So, I'm not really sure what that even means. Objective.
If I make a claim, there's a glass of water, right? The logical certainty or logical truth of that glass of water being like there is one, is a logically true claim, that essentially is the same thing as my idea about there being a glass being objectively true. So if a claim is logically true, then my idea about it is objectively true. Does that make sense? It's just a way of defining vocabulary in a sense here. In other words, if I have an idea, I think he's saying that's what I just described, but it's also that in reverse in number one, is that if I have an idea that is objectively true, then there also exists a logically true sort of entity. Think about it like a mathematical true thing. So if I have an objective idea about a circle,
Bye, teacher.
and it's objectively true, then there exists a mathematically like sort of circle that's logically true, independent of my idea about that circle, given that my idea is objectively true. Does that make sense?
Let me see. Will I stream more this summer? I'll try and do it here and there. The problem is I'm going to be traveling quite a bit, so there'll be at least a few weeks where I just won't be able to stream. I also have some work, so it's going to be kind of not the most structured, a little bit kind of hit or miss. So unfortunately, it's not going to be a lot. But I'll definitely try to come on at least a couple more times. But if I don't see you, have a good summer. Let me think here real quick. So I have to go pretty soon. I'm meeting somebody at 8:30, so I'm gonna probably call it here. I just want to do one last thing on this. So I think, I mean, if I'm trying to connect this to his like I think therefore I am, right? So if his given idea is I think therefore I am, right?
Right.
So if in order for I think therefore I am to contain some objective reality, right? Like, so if I think therefore I am is the most objective reality we can all agree on, right?
Right.
Then it must derive it from some cause which contains at least as much formal reality. And we have to go back to his definition of what he means by formal reality.
Yeah, I think therefore I am is not the given idea. It's sort of the I think is the given idea. So idea is equivalent to my thinking, and I am is equivalent to objective reality. Do you see the connection there?
So okay, I see. Yeah. So the idea is that I think. Okay, got it. And so the reality is therefore I am.
Right.
Surely from.
So I think this is sort of saying in general, ideas imply objectively real, given the ideas are like true in a sense. So. And then I think therefore I am is sort of like a good example of that, where that you have to be certain about that relation. That relation is a valid relation. And one is just saying in general there's a relation between ideas and reality. Yeah. I think this is good.
Every idea is the idea of something. Okay, it represents something, but the formal reality is the reality of the idea as it is itself something. The idea is something in and of itself. Every idea is something in itself. Wow, this is like so like. The problem is clear. If an idea is by definition a representational mode of thought, then what does it mean to say that every idea is something in itself? It is true, but isn't this something a representation of an object?
Okay, I think this is adding I think the first two paragraphs are explaining what you need to know for Descartes. This guy's like asking a question, like given this guy seems to understand the argument.
Well, he's calling into question like what the heck is the difference between formal and objective reality? Like he's taking issue with that definition. Which if the definition doesn't work, then this first axiom becomes a little bit problematic.
My resolution to that is just that. So you have this framework. There are ideas and there are objects, right? So how do you know like they're different or this is the only two things? I think Descartes getting that from I think therefore I am. It's like fundamentally I can only really believe in two things: my thinking and my aming, and like the fact that they imply each other. So that's where that in itself, you can sort of say I can only be sure that there are things in which there are thoughts because I have a thought, and if I want to posit anything exists, I need to know that in order to posit that I exist, right? So then there are things that exist, and then there are thoughts, and those are the two things I can be most sure of to be true things. So I think I understand it now. So the formal is the sort of idea / thought and logic thing, and objective is sort of the real thing. And I think therefore I am, meaning that's like, axiom number 1, meaning I can only be sure that there are formal things and objective things at the minimum.
Okay. All right. Well.
Okay, I think I understand the argument now. I think the remaining 4 steps are very self-descriptive.
Yeah, I gotta go though, but
yeah,
this is good.
Yeah, this is good.
Darsh.
All right. Yeah, it was nice talking to you. Nice. Chilling.
Cool. Maybe I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, have a good summer.
All right. Yeah. You too.
Bye. Okay.